Timeless Assassin by author Raj_Shah_7152 Chapter 326-350. After returning to the conclave, Leo did not rush to leave the place immediately. Instead, he calmly spent a few more days going through additional books, hoping to gather more information about the ancient teleportation gate system Multheric had mentioned, as well as learning more about this world's terrain. He dove into a few old geography scrolls, trying to piece together what the world used to look like before it was sealed in time, and managed to successfully duplicate a perfect map of the whole world. It took a couple of days, but by the end of it, he managed to cross-reference the world map with the gate network that once existed. As he located the precise gate that linked Castle Bravo to a location just 20 miles from the exit point of this world. If I can time my raid on the castle with a rescue plane coming in, and flare a signal from just 20 miles out, there's a high chance I could be evacuated in time, Leo thought, as a rough and risky plan began forming in his head. However, with how tight the escape window was, and how uncertain it was to reactivate a teleportation gate that hadn't been used in millennia, Leo had no intentions of putting the plan into motion just yet. First priority is strength. This world is a training ground, and since the old dragon suggested I track, stalk, and hunt beasts, then that's exactly what I should do for now, Leo mused, as he began pooling mana behind his eyes and resumed practicing the sevenfold revelation codex at once. From now on, I will spend my days here slowly making my way towards Castle Bravo, while killing beasts and training the sevenfold revelation codex at the same time. Leo talked to himself, as he packed everything valuable he could find in the conclave into his storage ring, before locating a separate exit that led him to a new section of the underground tunnel system. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Border planet Juxta, outer defensive ring, cult military base. A man sat quietly on top of a huge anti-arc ship cannon, his eyes locked on the star-filled sky above. He did not look like he was gazing at anything in particular, however, then again, his gaze did peer far beyond what the mortal eye could see. A cigarette rested between his fingers, its tip glowing faintly in the dark. Bits of ash fell near his boots, but he didn't notice, as his coat continued to flap gently in the wind, marked with the crimson symbol of the cult. He was vice-cult leader Charles, the strongest active warrior the cult currently had. A monarch-tier fighter who could have easily been one of the 12 elders, but chose to stay on the front lines, for he did not care for politics. His job was to protect the cult's borders, and he liked it that way. "Sir, I have an urgent report, sir." A soldier ran up and saluted, his chest rising fast from the sprint. Charles did not look at him. He didn't say a word. He just flicked some ash off the cigarette and raised two fingers without taking his eyes off the sky. As the soldier took a breath and continued, "Sir, the First Elder has sent emergency rations, 30 tons of gunpowder reserves, and all the extra artillery he could find. Apart from him, the 3rd, 6th, 10th, and 12th Elders have sent backup too. A few 100,000 troops, several thousand crates of healing potions, and about 24 anti-arc ship missiles." He hesitated, then added, "But that's all we've got. If the righteous faction attacks in full force, this won't be enough. We need more, sir. Much more." Charles finally smiled. 32 planets under the cult's control, he said softly. 33 if we count Ixtal. He slowly turned his head toward the soldier, speaking in a calm voice. 12 elders on the council. Each one running between 1 and 4 planets. And all they could send to protect 3 of their frontier planets, is this. He let out a small laugh and stood up on the cannon. Then, without effort, he jumped down to the ground, as he landed without a sound. "I always told you, Fred, the council is made of a bunch of brain-dead idiots. If Lord Soren allowed me, I'd kill them all tomorrow, including the kind and intelligent First Elder. However, I can't," Charles complained, before letting out a deep sigh. "So what can we do but whine, Lieutenant Fred?" he said with a shrug. "We make do with what we have. But sir, if what the First Elder fears will come true, then we need more forces and ammunition to secure our borders. Please sir, if you write a letter to the other elders, perhaps they will arm us better. Fred begged, however, Charles only patted him on the shoulders in response. It's already too late for that, Fred, Charles said, as his face turned serious. Tell everyone to prepare for war, he said, as he glanced towards the night sky once again. I can see enemy ARC ships entering our solar system. We make contact in 2 hours. Alarms blared, and all men took their battle stations, as the cult operatives prepared for an imminent war. Soldiers scrambled across the base, retaliatory ships powered up, mana shields flickered to life, and long-range cannons turned skyward in perfect sync. Vice-cult leader Charles stood silently at the edge of the base, coat billowing behind him, eyes locked on the dark horizon where dozens of enemy ARC ships had begun appearing in the distance. A slow grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. Let them come, he muttered under his breath, voice low and sharp. It's been a while since I've washed my hands with righteous faction blood. The ground rumbled softly beneath his feet as mana surged through the base's core defenses. And thus, the countdown to war began. Meanwhile on a righteous faction, ARC ship, command deck, General Davian's POV. The control deck buzzed with quiet tension. Rows of operators worked at glowing panels, scanning spatial readouts and fielding encrypted transmissions. Far ahead, through the reinforced viewing glass, the vast expanse of stars framed the distant silhouette of planet Juxta. Captain Davian stood with arms crossed behind his back, his sharp blue uniform pressed to perfection, as his eyes scanned the radar projections in silence. He didn't speak until his second-in-command, Lieutenant Commander Rena, approached with a datapad. All units are in position, General. Our second wave of fodder crafts is prepped and ready. We've also started filming all deployment footage as instructed by Central Command, with propaganda teams on standby, waiting for your instructions on how to shoot the deployment. The Central Command has given this operation the title, Retribution has begun, and they want us to produce some stellar shots as soon as possible, which is the only goal of Phase 1, she said, handing him the pad. Davian didn't look at it. Instead, his gaze remained fixed on the distant planet. So this is how they want to start it, he muttered, voice low. A war choreographed like a stage play, with cameras rolling and smoke machines hissing while people die in the background. He finally glanced at the pad, then handed it back. Any updates from Mission Control? He asked. Same as before. We don't have the green light to send in anything higher than a Valor-class ship into planet Juxta's atmosphere. They want us to wear down the cult's defenses, bait out their anti-air artillery and mana cannons with empty fodder ships and disposable troops, while making no elite troop deployment until the second phase begins, Rena replied, as Davian let out a small breath through his nose. They know we can't match the cult's defensive tech, so they want us to throw bodies and scrap metal at them until they overheat their cannons. A sound strategy, Rena said. A dirty one, Davian corrected, before turning to walk toward the tactical map table. We'll send waves of unmanned aircrafts first. Half of them will carry reflective signal cores to look like they're piloted. The rest, fill them with Master and Grandmaster ranked volunteers. They'll know it's a suicide run, but someone has to set the tone. And the survivors? She asked. Make sure they're on camera, Davian said coldly. The universe doesn't care about silent martyrs. They want faces. Heroes. Blood. He paused, turning back toward the wide view of the looming planet. Begin deployment. Phase 1 starts now. Rena saluted, her boots clicking against the floor. Yes, General. And just like that, the first arc of war began not with a battle cry, but with the quiet, surgical detachment of a machine that had done this 1,000 times before. As from the edge of space, metallic wings began to descend. Davian watched as thousands of ships rode in formation and descended toward the surface of planet Juxta, their engines humming with controlled aggression, as they pointed their guns towards the planet. And then, one by one, they began to die. The first wave of glider-class scouts disintegrated the moment they touched the shimmering curve of the planet's mana shield. There was no fire, no grand explosions, just instant vaporization, like chalk dust hitting a wall of lightning. The cannon carriers came next, which were competitively much larger, slower, bulkier ships with enough firepower to hopefully punch a hole through the planet's mana shield with raw force. However, although thousands of them fired towards Juxta's defensive shield at once, not one of them managed to scratch it, as the shield reacted before contact, crackling with raw divine energy as brilliant arcs of blue light reached out and tore them apart midair. Some cannon carriers exploded, some twisted into debris, while some got instantly vaporized. A handful of striker pods, their trajectories wild and unstable, managed to breach the barrier, but their engines sputtered on entry, their hulls catching flame as Juxta's dense atmosphere dragged them down like insects into a furnace. As in the end, none of them managed to make it to the surface. Davian didn't blink, he just stood there and watched. First wave, 100% loss, Rena muttered, stunned, as although she expected this outcome, she hoped that at least a couple ships would make it to the surface intact, however, none did. What do we do now, sir? She asked, as Davian just let out a deep sigh. Now we camp outside their planet, and send the first footage back home as nothing but our base ships camping outside their atmosphere. Central Command will have to make do with it for today. Tomorrow, we send another wave of dummy crafts to test their defenses. This is a war of attrition, Rena. There are no winners or losers in this stage of the war, just resources being depleted. We lost a few men and a few ships today, while they lost millions of mana stones to power up that shield. Let's see, which one of us bleeds out first, Davian said, as he turned and left the command station. Meanwhile on the surface of planet Juxta. It was a festival down below for the cult soldiers, who cheered loudly every time an enemy ship got vaporized. The sky lit up like fireworks, arcs of divine mana exploding with every failed entry attempt, as vessel after vessel was shredded, burned, or erased entirely before even breaching the upper atmosphere. Men clapped, officers smirked, some even began placing bets on how many ships would manage to pass through the mana shield. Most bets stayed at 0. Boom. That's 47 in a row. One soldier laughed, pumping his fist in the air as another massive arc ship turned into little more than molten debris. The sky's raining metal, boys. Keep your helmets on. Another shouted, raising his shield toward the glowing clouds as scraps rained down like hail. Even the defensive outpost's loudspeakers joined in, blaring old wartime anthems while squad commanders stood with arms crossed, amused but not surprised. For them, this wasn't war. This was a show, and the cult owned the stage. Meanwhile, Fourth Elder's office, Planet Tithia. The crystal tablet slammed against the edge of the marble desk, cracking on impact as its flickering screen continued to display the live feed from Planet Juxta. The Fourth Elder stood frozen, fingers twitching at his side, as he watched ship after ship explode against the mana shield. The report he had received was brief. And the footage was mostly positive for the cult as a whole, however, for him personally, it was devastating. The righteous faction had attacked. And they'd attacked hard. Just 2 days ago, he'd stood before the council and laughed off the First Elder's warnings, calling them nothing more than empty words. He had accused the First Elder of fear-mongering and wasting resources. But now the front lines were burning, and he looked like a complete fool because of it. Step. He paced slowly through his lavish chamber, the carpet muffling his footsteps as his aura simmered with rage. This can't possibly be a coincidence, he muttered, voice low. This was a setup. His eyes narrowed as he stared into the distance. Lord First, did you have concrete intel? Did you know for sure that this attack was going to happen? And did you conceal it, just to watch me fall? The thought poisoned him. There had been no prior indication about the righteous faction planning an attack before the First Elder called for an emergency meeting. And yet just 2 days after the First Elder called for a meeting, the attack already happened. Coincidentally, the First Elder's shipments of aid had already been delivered just this morning, alongside those who heeded his warning. However, those that did not choose to heed it, now looked like absolute jackasses. The troops on the front line as well as the citizens of planet Juxta were sure to develop a positive image of the First Elder after today, praising him as their most benevolent benefactor, while the rest of the council seemed immature and uncaring in comparison. In his mind, the Fourth Elder strongly believed that this couldn't be just a coincidence, and that the First Elder had probably set him up, as he hated himself for being outmaneuvered. Now I look like a jackass and a hothead in front of the other elders. The Fourth Elder thought, as he clenched his fist, jaw tight. If this war dragged on, and he was remembered as the fool who denied it, then his influence within the council would surely crumble, which would be devastating for his future ambitions to slowly rise to the post of First Elder, as if he screwed up his momentum now, he would probably never get another chance to usurp him for a decade. Meanwhile, within the First Elder's office, planet Tithia. Step. The First Elder also paced around his office with equal anger and intensity as the Fourth, as he couldn't believe that the righteous faction would attack so soon. It's not enough. We aren't ready. We need much more artillery output if we are to keep Juxta safe for a long time. The First Elder thought, as he clenched his fists in anger. The Second Elder was the one that controlled the biggest forges within the cult, and it was his duty to supply the front lines with ammunition in times of war. However, with the Second Elder being heavily influenced by the Fourth Elder's stupidity, he chose not to send arms to the front lines after the emergency meeting. Idiot. The First Elder clicked his tongue and stopped pacing, placing his palm against the windowpane as he looked out over the quiet skyline of Tithia. The cityscape shimmered under the mixed-sized sun, calm and oblivious to the madness that had begun a few solar systems away. There is no war. If we are going to theorize things without proof, then I theorize that the righteous faction will not attack. The Fourth Elder's arrogant voice still echoed in his head. You're trying to scare the council, Lord First. You're growing old. And paranoid. The fool had said, as thinking back upon it, the First Elder couldn't help but grit his teeth in anger now. That bastard had undermined him in front of everyone, mocked him, discredited his years of wisdom, and painted his warnings as senile fear-mongering. But now the Fourth Elder's smug face was probably buried behind closed doors, red with shame as the headlines came flooding in from Juxta. And although part of the First Elder burned with justified anger, he couldn't deny the slight relief he felt, either. Because in a twisted way, this attack had proved him right. Juxta hadn't suffered any meaningful losses. The mana shield held strong. The artillery that did make it through the blockade was handled cleanly and the cult's soldiers were on guard and ready for this attack. Which meant, all things considered, today had been a win. It had been a warning shot. A start of a possibly long war. However, it wasn't the all-out attack that wiped out Juxta, which it could very well have been. I hope the others wake up after today. The First Elder thought, as he hoped, deeply hoped, that the council's more stubborn voices would finally wake up after watching the footage of today's attack and start taking things seriously. Because they wouldn't get another grace period like this again. As of today, they could still contribute towards the security of the border planets and start increasing their industrial output to support wartime needs. However, if they did not mend their ways even now, and continued to senselessly challenge the righteous faction, then they would very well be the architects of their own downfall. This is exactly why I can't let the Fourth Elder's candidate become the next dragon. That idiot doesn't have the composure, nor the common sense, to know what's best for this cult in the long term. He thinks with a hot head and doesn't care about the consequences of his actions. He thinks shouting louder inside the council room makes him right. But when it mattered, when a real threat stood at our gates, he did not have the foresight to predict it. If someone like him were ever to lead the council, it wouldn't just be Juxta that falls. It would be all of us. The First Elder muttered, as this was the final straw he needed to convince himself that the Fourth was not suitable to be a voice of reason within the council and that he needed to be booted out at the earliest. Leo's paw, time-stilled world. Leo exited the conclave with a mindset completely different from when he had first entered. He had entered the tunnel as a hesitant and broken man, however, he came out of it a confident warrior. With a clear understanding of the surrounding geography and his body restored to its peak, Leo began actively seeking out beasts to hunt, using every encounter as a way to push his mana heart closer to its limits. He did not get reckless or start attacking any random beast that he came across, but rather remained cautious with every step he took, never entering a tunnel without thoroughly scanning for danger first. But once a beast beneath the transcendent tier came into view, he immediately marked it for death, as he tracked, stalked, and executed each of them with cold, clinical precision, refining both his instincts and his power with every kill. Once the psychological horror of the time-stilled world began to fade for him, he started to truly enjoy this world for all the unique experiences it offered, and in particular the hunting opportunities it presented. That's the second giant rock beetle I've seen today, Leo thought, as he silently stalked a giant rock beetle that was making its way through the tunnel system, trying to find prey of its own. Had he still had the old mindset, where he viewed every monster in this world as something grotesque and extremely dangerous, he could have probably found a million reasons to avoid fighting this rock beetle. However, with his mentality changed, he just saw it as a juicy challenge, more than an abhorrent monster. The pitch-black armor on the body of the rock beetle was so tough, that he had broken 2 daggers trying to kill the first one he encountered today, and that one looked half the size of this one. It was a monstrous creature, coated in thick plates of stone-hard shell, with foul green pus dripping between its joints and a thick stench clinging to its every movement. Its mandibles could easily crush bones, and its screech was loud enough to make the weaker beasts flee without a fight. In the time-stilled world, it had evolved, or rather twisted, into something far more repulsive than what the old bestiaries described. And yet, Leo didn't feel repulsed, but rather excited by the opportunity to kill it when he encountered one. Thrum, thrum, his heart beat with a steady rhythm, not with fear, but with focus, as he stalked it like a predator through the tunnels, observing its sluggish movement and lack of alertness. The beetle's thick hide seemed to give it confidence to hunt prey, however, its senses were surely not the sharpest, for it did not notice Leo crawling just a few paces behind, nor the way he eyed its movement to see which tunnel it would take. And then, it made a mistake. It entered a narrow tunnel, one barely wide enough for its body to scrape through. And it was here, where its mandibles were pinned forward, and the beast was unable to turn or twist, that Leo saw his opportunity to attack. He dashed into the tunnel with silent steps, slid in behind the beetle, and launched himself forward with a burst of mana behind his legs. Clang! His first strike was clean, but useless. The dagger hit the shell with a sharp clang and bounced off. A thin scratch marked the impact zone, but that was all. Screech! Asterisk. The beast screeched in panic, as it increased its pace and began running at full speed. However, Leo did not allow it to escape unscratched. Shing! Asterisk. Shing! Asterisk. He kept slamming the same spot again and again, gripping the writhing creature's back as it tried to shake him off, its limbs thrashing against the tunnel walls as dust and rock exploded around them. Come on, Leo muttered, gritting his teeth, as he landed another stab on the beast's back, then another, and another. Then, with his mana coiled into the blade and all the pressure focused on a single fracture, he activated Kill Strike. A low pulse of force surged through the dagger as it plunged deep, finally breaking through the armor. The beetle let out a shrill, ear-piercing scream as its body spasmed beneath him, but by then, it was already too late. Leo twisted the blade and detonated the mana charge inside its body, as with a muffled boom, he destroyed the beast's innards with a single attack. Plop! The beetle collapsed before him, its mandibles still twitching at the front as acid drooled from its mouth, but it was all in vain. With its innards shredded and back legs ruined, the creature could no longer move. It could only lie there, waiting for death to arrive, slow and agonizing, while Leo stood above it with the quiet smile of a conqueror. Die, beast, die, he muttered under his breath, watching it writhe beneath his feet. And it was in that moment, just for a second, that he saw it. A faint new aura beginning to wrap around his body. It lasted only a breath, and under the soft glow of the surrounding blue mana crystals, he couldn't be fully sure of the exact shade, but to him, it looked blood red. Blood red, could that be my killing intent? He wondered, his gaze falling to his hands. The aura had vanished, yet he kept staring at his palms, searching for answers in the lingering stillness. And the more he thought about it, the more certain he became. He had felt one emotion in that moment, raw, unfiltered bloodlust. The desire to kill. And if his instincts were right, then he had just witnessed the manifestation of his own killing intent, the second aura color he had awakened. I wonder what the Sevenfold Revelation Codex has to say about this. Leo wondered, as he immediately pulled out the meditation manual and a torchlight, to read what it had to say about this situation. Time-stilled world, an unknown underground tunnel, Leo's POV. As soon as Leo opened the codex, a new text began appearing on its pages, glowing faintly under the beam of his flashlight. Greater than, you have now perceived the second glimmer. Greater than, blood red, born from the ancient instinct to dominate and destroy. Greater than, this is the hue of pure killing intent. Unfiltered, undiluted. A force that exists beyond emotion, and is an intent so sharp it etches itself onto the world around you. Greater than, unlike frustration, which clouds the aura inward, killing intent extends outward. It touches your surroundings. It leaves trails, scars, and pressure. Greater than, you saw this color not because you wished to kill, but because you meant it. Greater than, recognize this difference. Track it. Study how it pulses when you're calm, how it sharpens when you're cornered, and how it fades when doubt seeps in. Greater than, only by mapping its fluctuations will you learn to bend it, to cloak it, to mask it, or to turn it into a blade sharper than any weapon you wield. The words faded, but Leo's eyes lingered on the empty page. The fact that the codex acknowledged it means that he hadn't imagined it. The blood-red shimmer had been real. So that's two now, maroon and blood-red. Frustration and killing intent, he thought, closing the codex slowly as he stared down at his open palm. He had somehow managed to spot two of the 7 primal aura colors now, albeit holding limited understanding in them. The codex told me to observe my killing intent. How it interacts with my surroundings, how it shifts when I simply want to kill versus when I truly mean it. And how it changes when doubt creeps into my mind, Leo muttered out loud, repeating the instructions the codex had given him. For now, he had only managed to observe the shade itself, but he hadn't yet grasped how it fluctuated under different mental states. He still had a long way to go before he could claim any real understanding, let alone mastery, over his own killing intent, as this was a journey that he had still only barely started. 200 days passed quickly for Leo, with him taking that long to finally make his way out of the endless tunnel system and reach the surface once again. During this time, his body underwent drastic changes. His muscle density had increased significantly, while his mana capacity and spell output were now nearly 50% higher than when he had first entered this world. The denser, richer mana of the time-stilled world had rebuilt his blood from the inside out, making each cell in his body stronger, larger, and more efficient. It took him a while to notice it. The improvement was subtle at first, such as barely perceptible changes in his stamina, recovery rate, and endurance, but over time, the effects of the mana heart-enriched body became impossible to ignore. His mana circuits, which had once resisted and strained under high-speed circulation, now felt almost frictionless. The micro-imperfections that previously slowed his casting were gone, refined away by the passive work of the mana heart. If before he could activate Vanish in 0.8 seconds at perfect mastery, he could now do it in 0.4. It was still categorized under the same grade, but in practice, the difference was massive. That split second could mean the difference between life and death in close-quarter combat, and with all of his skills seeing a massive casting time boost, it was safe to say that his combat ability had improved by leaps and bounds. And yet, despite all his progress in terms of his physical abilities and his skill moves, if there was one area where he did not make any improvements at all, It was the sevenfold revelation codex, as he saw no progress made beyond the colors he had already uncovered. In all of the past 200 days, he had not seen a single new color, as the blood red of his killing intent remained the only aura he had observed after maroon. He had seen it flare around him 3 more times in the past 200 days, and on one rare occasion, he even noticed the faint imprint of his own aura still lingering on a beast he had just killed, like a shadow that hadn't caught up with its source. But beyond that, there was nothing. No new colors. No new insights. As even within the blood-red shade he had observed, there was nothing new to draw a conclusive insight from, regarding how his mental state affected his killing intent. The codex remained frustratingly silent, with no new texts appearing on its surface, no matter how many times Leo opened the manual. But still, Leo didn't stop. Every beast he hunted, every breath of mana he absorbed, every emotion he felt, whether it was joy, hate, love or anxiety, he kept checking his body for signs of a new color, as although he saw nothing, he could feel himself getting closer to something. For now, he wasn't sure as to what it was, but he had a firm belief that he was on the right track. And so, after nearly 7 months of crawling, killing, training, and growing stronger beneath the earth, as he finally saw the muted gray-orange sky once again, he couldn't help but feel a small feeling of joy enveloping his body, as the journey to the surface had been nothing but difficult. "I'm finally back to the surface," Leo muttered, as he gazed towards the twilight sky and let out a sigh of relief, when something unexpected happened. For a brief moment, he saw the color sky blue enveloping his body. It was vibrant and light, but it disappeared almost as fast as it appeared, as it blended into the twilight sky. A new color. Leo wondered, as he tried to find the traces of the sky blue all over his body. However, it was too late. The color was gone, and the only way to confirm what he had seen was to seek validation from the sevenfold revelation codex, which was exactly what he did as he opened the book yet again. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description. Time-stilled world, surface plateau, Leo's POV. As soon as Leo opened the codex, a new string of words began etching themselves onto the aged parchment, glowing faintly in the ambient twilight like soft ripples on still water. Greater than, you have now perceived the third glimmer. Greater than, sky blue, a color born from the harmony between joy and hope. Greater than, this is the hue of optimism, born between the joy of triumph and the hope of a brighter future, the true ideal state that all men chase. Greater than, it marks the end of a burdened breath. The stillness after a storm. The faintest hint of light after enduring long shadows. Greater than, unlike frustration and killing intent, this color neither lingers nor stains, it visits, then leaves and must be cherished, not chased. Greater than, to become a true leader, you must understand what keeps it alive. For the strongest leaders are not those who command fear or respect, but those who inspire hope and joy in their subjects. The text shimmered faintly, then faded into stillness once more. Leo said nothing. His fingers lingered on the page, as his thoughts trailed back to the sky blue hue he had seen just moments ago. It was fleeting, he thought. But it felt good. And maybe that was the point. Not every emotion was a weapon to sharpen. Some were just reminders. Indicators that perhaps the worst times were behind one and that there was hope for better times ahead. The color of joy and hope. I hope to see you more often. Leo mused, as a soft smile spread on his face. Of the 3 colors he had seen so far, blue was definitely the one he wanted to see more of. However, he had a strong feeling in his heart that blue would also prove to be the hardest color to see throughout his life. After returning to the surface, Leo slowly began making his way towards the mountain ridge, which was roughly 300 kilometers away from the canyon, and was a journey through a mostly arid desert. Having entered this world with enough supplies to last him 1500 days, Leo had already run through about 250 to 270 days worth of supplies since being separated from the team, meaning that roughly 3 days had passed in the outside world since he had entered this realm. According to his approximation, he could cover the distance of 300 kilometers to the base of the mountain in about 4 days if he traveled non-stop. However, if he paused to hunt and eat, it would take him anywhere between 8 to 12 days to do the same. According to historical warnings, this desert is home to countless giant sandworms, ranging from master to transcendent tier in strength. So it should be good fun to hunt them, Leo thought, as he began making his way west toward the mountain range, carefully moderating his steps to avoid making unnecessary noise that might draw the attention of sandworms that he wasn't ready to fight yet. But less than an hour into his trek, he suddenly spotted a cluster of human footprints etched into the sand, too clean and recent to ignore, which immediately alerted him to the presence of nearby assassins. Kneeling to inspect them, he noted the precise heel impressions and intact tread patterns at the toes, all of which pointed towards the fact that their gear was still in good condition. They hadn't been in this world long enough for their soles to lose grip or wear down just yet, indicating that they weren't here for more than 100 days yet. The footprints were fresh, pressed lightly into the surface, with even spacing and clear tread from intact boots. That alone told him these weren't the prints of aimless madmen, but a group of well-equipped assassins still in their right minds. Interesting, Leo crouched down, inspecting the tracks more closely, as he noticed how there were no palm marks after each step, indicating that they were walking on just 2 feet and not all fours like beasts, and how the spacing between each person was tight, barely an arm's length apart, which meant that their team chemistry had not broken down just yet. The close gap while walking meant that everyone in the group trusted one another, as unlike Raiden's group, where everyone kept distance from one another out of fear of betrayal, this group moved as a unit. A stable group. It might be worth talking to them. It's been about 250 days since I've spoken to another human being, and they might have some insights about this world that I don't, Leo thought, as he rose from the sand and began following the footsteps. He trailed the footprints for nearly 5 kilometers, his steps light and calculated as he weaved through the open dunes, eyes never leaving the trail ahead. The sand was soft, the air dry, and the environment eerily still, until it wasn't. Shing. Asterisk. Clang. Asterisk. Spread out. Fan formation. Suddenly, the stillness cracked. The sharp clang of steel echoed through the air, followed by the barking of combat commands and the unmistakable rhythm of weapons clashing. Leo's pupils constricted, as without hesitation, he broke into a sprint towards the source of the sound. His assassin cloak fluttered behind him, boots kicking up shallow plumes of sand as he pushed forward, his heart rate steady, his mana ready to spike at a moment's notice. Who are they fighting? Is it a sandworm? No, the sound was definitely metal clashing against metal, as if they're fighting another human, Leo assessed, as he arrived near the source of the conflict, and hid behind the peak of a low dune. What laid before him was a sight he never expected to see, as for a moment he lost control of his emotions completely, until Monarch's indifference reminded him to breathe again. Before him, a small party of adventurers seemed to be locked in a desperate struggle, trying to contain the erratic, jerking movements of a single opponent. A lone man, cloaked in torn robes, limbs twitching with disjointed aggression, and thick strands of drool trailing from his cracked lips, as he moved like a rabid animal, swinging wildly but with precision that came from sheer, unnatural instinct. Leo's jaw clenched. Carl. Even from a distance, he could recognize that disgruntled face, those half-mad eyes, and that evil grin that had haunted his nights many times since he had fallen from the floating islands. Only now, something about him was off. Utterly off. As if he had one foot in reality, and the other knee-deep in madness. Leo observed Carl from behind the sand dune, watching as the traitor fought the 7 assassins spread around him with a feral smile stretched wide across his face. A part of Leo wanted to leap in, strike Carl down and end the bastard for good, but something about the man's current aura made his skin crawl. His current aura did not feel like the Carl he remembered. It felt dangerous, predatory, and hence, his instincts told him to stay low, and wait. That aura, it feels like a transcendent tier warrior. Is that his true strength? Leo wondered, narrowing his eyes as he tried to reconcile this monster before him with the cook he once knew. The Carl he remembered had been a weak, soft-spoken, master-tier chef with a silver tongue and a coward's spine. Leo had never seen him fight seriously, never even considered him a threat. But now the pressure rolling off him was unnatural, as though he was a transcendent tier berserker that had lost his mind, as Leo couldn't help but be wary of him. His movements teetered between clarity and chaos, his body twitching with raw instinct while his eyes struggled to focus. What is that speed? Leo thought, as he watched Carl dodge yet another dagger flying his way. Currently, he stood in the center of the 7 assassins, cornered in a circle. However, the expression on his face made it seem like he wasn't worried about being ganged up on at all. He stood with his spine bent at an unnatural angle, head twitching sporadically to one side, while drool spilled from his slack jaw that opened and closed in uneven, labored gasps. And yet, despite the grotesque presentation, when he moved like a demon. His bare feet scraped across the sand with explosive pivots, his fingers curled more like claws than hands, and each lunge he made came with an unnatural twist of muscle and joint that shouldn't have been possible for a human body. The 7 Grandmaster tier assassins held their ground in a tight ring around him, faces set with discipline and nerves pulled taut. However, despite their advantage in numbers, it was clear that they were struggling to contain him. Each of them wielded a unique weapon, daggers, short spears, glowing gauntlets, all of them worn, tested, and bloodied from many battles before. Showing that they were an experienced bunch, however, they still struggled to pin Carl down. Circle tighter. Don't let him break out. Byron, go left, used serrated wind step, and cut his ankle from behind. Hold formation. Their leader, a silver-haired woman shouted with a commanding voice, as her long braid swung behind her. Byron obeyed immediately. His boots flared with wind mana as he blurred sideways and sliced low toward Carl's ankle, with the blade even making contact. Slash. The blade slid off the flesh, as instead of making a cut, it rang out with a metallic screech, skimming over skin that sounded like reinforced steel. Hey, Carl chuckled, as instead of flinching from the pain, he giggled. His hand shot forward, seizing Byron by the crown of his head like a man grabbing an apple, as he tried to squeeze and pop Byron's skull. However, before he could do so, another warrior from the team yelled, "Stone palm counter," and slammed into Carl's elbow just in time to deflect the lethal motion. Pop! Carl's elbow joint popped out of place with a wet crack, his arm jerking back. But he didn't scream, didn't even wince from the pain, as he only let out a low, guttural groan, as if the pain reminded him that he was still alive. Keep the pressure. Rotate angles. Della, hit him with blazing feint. Don't let him catch his footing. The leader shouted again, as Della darted in with speed, her spear blazing orange, as she angled for Carl's chest. Swoosh. Her attack narrowly missed, grazing past Carl's shoulder as the transcendent tier warrior twisted at the last possible moment, but not fast enough to completely evade, as the tip of Della's spear tore a small chunk of flesh from his arm. Why isn't he bleeding? Della hissed as she stared at Carl's arm that was injured but still not bleeding, as barely any blood seeped out of his wound. He's already mutated, another muttered. That body's not entirely human anymore, their leader observed, as Carl suddenly crouched low, then shot upward like a coiled spring, his leg hooking under the chin of a twin dagger wielder named Reed who had closed in for an attack after Della. Crack! Reed's head jerked back as his body launched into the air, landing with a dull thud against a dune wall. Blood poured from his mouth, and though he twitched once, he never moved again. Shit, Reed's down. The team flinched, unsure of how to respond to the sudden death, as all it took for Carl to take one of them down was one clean kick to the chin, which connected with enough power to kill a Grandmaster. Snap. Carl snapped back his dislocated arm with a sickening pop after killing Reed, as he charged toward the next smallest member of the team, a boy no older than 20, who had barely finished gathering enough mana for an explosive attack spell. Punch! Carl reached him before the spell could form, as his hand punched through the boy's stomach like it was wet parchment. Splat! Blood erupted from the boy's mouth in violent bursts, pouring down his chin in thick streams as his spine bent forward at a grotesque angle. His body convulsed, knees buckling beneath him, until Carl grabbed and twisted his hand. Then came the rip. With a brutal upward motion, Carl's arm tore through the boy's torso, and the sound it made was like wet fabric being shredded underwater. A spray of entrails burst out with a sickening pop, as his other hand clawed through the chest cavity, fingers raking across bone and tendon, peeling flesh from ribs like stripping bark from a tree. The boy's mouth gaped, frozen in silence, as his scream got strangled before it could ever leave. His windpipe had been crushed the moment Carl's arm had punched through his diaphragm, and hence no sound could escape his lips when he died. Thud. By the time the corpse hit the ground, it no longer resembled a person. It was a heap of ragged meat, scattered intestines, and something wet and pulsing that used to be a heart. Leo did not flinch at the gruesome sight, but the others in the team were clearly disturbed. They were all assassins who had witnessed their fair share of cruelty in their lifetimes. They had all inflicted pain and danced in the blood of enemies. But this was different. This was savagery. The kind born not from rage, but from something deeper, something feral, unhinged, and free of restraint, as in the face of such savagery even the bravest of hearts trembled. I don't think we can take him, Captain. We can't tear past his skin. I think we should make a run for it. Della suggested, as the captain grit her teeth in dismay. No, the captain said in a low voice. He's faster than all of us. If we run, we will be picked out one after another. We either face him here, or we die, she said, as she knew that there was no chance of outrunning this monster. Time-stilled world, desert plateau, Leo's POV. Leo crouched low behind the sand dune, his gaze locked onto Carl's twitching frame, as blood from the two fallen assassins pooled into the cracked earth beside their fallen bodies. Currently, he wasn't the only one hesitating. The remaining 5 assassins stood frozen around Carl as well, their gazes landing nervously on one another, as they wrestled with the same uncomfortable question as he was. Did they stay and fight? Or did they run while they still could? It was the kind of decision that couldn't be made lightly. And for Leo, it ran deeper than just fear or rage. Because for him, this wasn't just some random lunatic roaming the sands. This was Carl, the man who had betrayed him. The man who had smiled in his face and fed him food, while secretly working to deliver him into the hands of death. The man who had turned on his team without a flicker of remorse. Leo's hand brushed the hilts of his daggers, as the urge to strike within him was strong. He wanted to carve justice into Carl's flesh. He wanted to repay the betrayal in full. But the image of Reed flying backward, and of the young boy torn apart like wet paper, kept playing in his mind. The current Carl before him wasn't the same man he knew. The current Carl was stronger, sharper, wilder. He was a transcendent tier warrior, with skin that resisted blades, and muscles that snapped bones with casual precision. Fuck me, I hate that bastard too much to just walk away knowing that he's alive. Leo thought, as he clenched his jaw in fury. If I can get close enough, I can probably decapitate him with a single blow. But that's only if I get the chance to land a clean strike. Leo thought, as he retrieved a dagger from his utility belt and stared into his reflection in the cold steel. During the last 200 days, he had trained many moves in his arsenal including his newly obtained moves. Storm Flash Traverse, and Astral Hook Bind, which he improved to advanced mastery. However, the most important move that he had trained was the Dark Blade, which he discovered to be a technique that could easily help him slash through flesh, steel and rock, with almost no resistance. After initially struggling to kill monsters with his raw strength, he had eventually began to rely on the move more and more with each passing day, which was why he knew with confidence that the attack could help him kill Carl with one strike. If I can use Dark Blade, I can probably take his head clean off in a single strike, but for it to work, I need to time my attack perfectly. The bastard is too fast and moves erratically, so if I don't time it to perfection, he will escape and I will be forced to fight a difficult fight from that point onwards. Leo thought, as he clutched the dagger tightly and returned his gaze to the battlefield. On one hand, he knew that the sensible choice here was to run and leave Carl alone. However, on the other hand, he was sure that he would not be able to live with himself if he let the bastard that backstabbed him just go free, which was why he decided to stay back and wait until the perfect opportunity presented itself. This isn't about pride or ego, but if you fuck with me then you must pay, Leo told himself as he took another quiet breath. If he struck now, he would die. But if he waited for the right moment, if he studied Carl long enough, found the cracks in his rhythm and learned how the madness flowed through him, then maybe, just maybe, he could kill him. Sigh. Leo exhaled slowly, his decision made. He would not run, but he would not strike yet either. He would watch, wait, and when the moment came, he would end Carl with no hesitation. Dash 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 dash. We must fight, the captain declared, her voice cracking like thunder. Della, restrict his movement. Everyone else, target his vitals. We end him now, or we die. Her words lit the team into motion. Della sprang forward, mana condensing under her heels as she activated Burning Arc Step, which launched her around Carl's flank in a tight loop. With the momentum of the circle, she activated Meteor Bind, summoning burning chains from above to trap Carl's limbs. The restraints struck true, coiling around his wrists and ankles mid-lunge, locking him in place. Now, the captain shouted, as 4 assassins closed in on him from all angles. The gauntlet fighter led with abyssal impact, driving both fists into Carl's sternum with the explosive power of a close combat fighter. Behind him, the dagger wielder lunged high, triggering Heaven's Carve, a dual slash toward the neck that aimed to decapitate from both sides. The third charged low, blade flashing as he triggered Piercing Fang, aimed for Carl's exposed liver. The captain herself surged forward last, her spear wrapped in a white aura as she released Frostbreak Slash, a freezing attack aimed at Carl's jaw to shatter the skull entirely. For one fleeting second, it looked like the plan had worked. And then, snap, crackle, laugh. Carl laughed, a low, slithering, broken sound that oozed from his throat like rot. Then he flexed once, and the binds holding him still exploded, hitting the assassins charging in on him with tremendous force. The gauntlet assassin was thrown back first, his chest armor dented inward as he coughed blood. The dagger wielder managed to avoid the debris, but was caught mid-air, Carl's shoulder slamming into her with impossible speed and force, as she slammed into the sand, spine first, and didn't move again. And then came the captain. Her ice spear connected, only for Carl to open his mouth and bite down on the metal with a sickening crunch sound, as he bit through the metal like a savage. The hell? The captain murmured, looking confused as her trusty weapon was broken in the most absurd way possible. Night night, Carl muttered, as he kicked her straight in the sternum, sending her flying backwards, as she hit the same dune that Leo was hiding behind. Thud. Blood gushed from her lips, as she struggled to stay conscious, watching as Carl went after Della next. However, she was unable to intervene or help. Her own body refused to move, and although she was conscious, she could do little more than barely staying upright, as every bone in her body ached from the sudden impact. Can't die here, she muttered, gripping onto her broken spear, as she showed guts and staggered forward, only to stumble to her knees and cough blood, as the damage to her body seemed to be worse than what she initially estimated. At this point it was pure adrenaline that was keeping her conscious and nothing else, as the amount of internal damage that she had accumulated was enough to kill anyone. However, despite her vision blacking out, and the strength seeping from her limbs, she still pulled mana into her spear, as she tried to launch one last long-range attack to help Della before she passed out, only for Carl to notice her futile struggle and charge towards her, to end her life for once and for all. Time-stilled world, desert plateau, Leo's POV. Leo felt his heart jump into his throat when the captain was sent flying in his direction. Thud. Her body slammed against the side of the very dune he was hiding behind, skidding down the slope before landing in a crumpled heap not 10 feet from where he crouched, as for a brief moment, he stopped breathing altogether, feeling afraid that Carl would follow through and discover him next. No. Stay down. Please just stay down, Leo silently begged, eyes fixed on the broken woman whose body twitched with pain. Don't get back up. Don't draw his attention in this direction, just die quietly if you have to. Leo prayed silently, however, to his dismay the woman did not stay down. Her spirit burned too bright, and even with blood in her throat and fractures in her spine, she reached for her broken spear and pulled herself to her knees, barely able to hold steady as she gathered mana one last time. Why? Why do you have to be so brave? Leo grit his teeth, his mind racing as he realized he had no time left to hesitate. The woman trying to attack Carl meant that it was a guarantee that he would discover him soon enough, which was not an ideal scenario for his ambush. Hence, in that split second, he made a choice. A reckless, bold, and innovative choice to force an opening. As the moment Carl observed her attack and began charging towards her, Leo stood up from behind the sand dune and bolted across its crest. Tap, tap, tap. Sand kicked beneath his feet as he ran, exposing himself fully to Carl's corrupted gaze. As looking at his visage, Carl froze. His steps halted mid-charge, and his blood-smeared face twisted into confusion. Skyshard, he muttered, squinting toward the figure running across the dune, as recognition flashed in his eyes, but so did hesitation. If he still had his full mind, if the taint hadn't dulled his logic, he would have realized the obvious in a split second. That this had to be a trap. However, with the taint of this world dulling his critical thinking skills, he couldn't figure out how Leo, who wasn't supposed to be alive in the first place, was now not only alive but also running away from him out of nowhere. Swoosh. Asterisk. Making the most of the distraction, the silver-haired captain clutched her broken spear and used the last dregs of her strength to release the spell she had been forming. Ice thrust. A pulse of energy surged forward from the tip of her spear, as she forced Carl to bend backward with that unnatural curve of his spine to dodge the attack. However, in doing so, Carl also backed himself into an awkward angle from where he couldn't easily maneuver anymore. Which was the exact opportunity the real Leo had been waiting for. The figure running across the dune shimmered and dissolved into glass-like fragments. It had never been him. It had been a decoy projected by Mirror World while the real him remained crouched just behind the dune all along. And in the exact moment that Carl bent backward to dodge the captain's spear, the real Leo, who was desperately waiting for an opening to attack, immediately burst into action, as in that same breath, he triggered blade shift. A burst of black mist kicked up behind the sand dune, barely visible against the swirling winds of the desert, as his body blinked across the battlefield with razor-sharp precision. He appeared just behind Carl, his cloak trailing in the wake of the teleportation as he gripped his dagger tight, mana already surging violently into the edge of the blade, as he activated Dark Blade. Sizzle. Flames of deep obsidian swallowed the length of the dagger, licking up the sides like living shadows, as the weapon vibrated in his hand, thirsting for a cut. Slice. Asterisk. Leo struck. A single, calculated swing. His arm moved in silence, guided by months of repetition, as the black flames hissed against the air, and then came the contact. The blade kissed Carl's neck. There was no resistance. The dagger sank in as if slicing through melted butter, and for a brief moment, Carl's eyes widened to their limits, flickering with something between disbelief and pure animal confusion, as his left eye twitched, while his right one convulsed. And then everything went still. The obsidian blade passed cleanly through skin, tendon, and spine, parting muscle like cloth soaked in oil. There was no splatter, no burst of gore, just a soft *shhhhhkk* sound and a surgical separation, as Carl's head slid away from his body in a slow, smooth arc. His face froze mid-expression. Mouth open, eyes wide, brows furrowed, as if still trying to process the fact that Leo Skyshard, the boy he had betrayed, was standing behind him in the flesh. Thud. The head landed on the sand with a dull, lifeless bounce. The body followed a moment later, collapsing in a twitching heap, its nerves firing off one last confused signal as arms jerked and legs spasmed like a puppet with its strings cut. A small curl of smoke rose from the clean cut on the stump of his neck, dark flame still eating away at the nerves, cauterizing the severed flesh from within. And just like that, Carl was dead. Silenced by a single, perfect strike. Land. Leo landed lightly on his feet, Carl's blood sizzling and misting on his dagger as it came into contact with the dark flames on his blade, as his expression remained cold and empty. "Tell your superiors in the cult that I said hi," Leo muttered as he looked into Carl's shocked eyes. "Oops. Guess you won't be able to. After all, I am sending you to the same place I sent your friend who attacked me before you. I guess the only person you can tell hi is him in hell," Leo said, as he stomped cruelly on Carl's decapitated head, the repressed rage inside his body finally bubbling outwards now that he had the chance to claim retribution. Stomp, stomp, stomp. He stomped on the head with all the force he could muster. However, the hardened skin and bone did not disfigure or break, as the only thing that happened was that a few milliliters of blood slowly trickled out of the base, while his shocked eyes finally closed forever. "Shouldn't have tried to kill me, motherfucker," Leo said at the end as he kicked the head away like a football, while Della and the captain, the only two survivors of Carl's carnage, studied his antics with a shocked expression on their faces. "Sorry ladies, I didn't mean to scare you, but I have been waiting for a long time to kick his head away. Hope you guys don't mind," Leo said, as he finally acknowledged the crowd, and calmly apologized for his actions, in case he accidentally scared them both. Thud. The captain was the first to pass out, as after the adrenaline wore thin, she did not have it in her to stay conscious for too long. While Della passed out next, as she had picked up injuries of her own, and had lost too much blood to stay conscious as well. Time-stilled world, desert plateau, Leo's POV. Leo stood motionless for a moment, his dagger still faintly sizzling with dark flames, as the two women lay unconscious before him. His gaze drifted between them, the silver-haired captain who had tried to save her comrade despite being broken herself, and the younger girl, Della, whose blood-soaked robes clung to her frame. "Do I just leave them here? Or do I help them?" he wondered, his fingers twitching with indecision. He had no obligation to them. No connection, nor any particular reason to save them. And yet, something kept him from simply walking away. Maybe it was the old dragon's words about karma, and how one should strive to spread good in this universe. Or maybe it was just a whim, but Leo decided to help them survive, if only for a couple more days. Sigh. With a sigh, he crouched beside Della, slinging her limp form across his shoulder with practiced ease before carefully laying her down next to her captain. Their breaths were shallow, but steady, as they seemed to be stable and alive for now, despite being unconscious. I should feed them a few healing potions, Leo thought, as he reached for the mana storage ring around his neck, before pausing midway, as he realized that wasting his own personal resources on strangers was beyond stupid. Instead, he turned away from them and walked toward the battlefield, where the rest of their squad lay cold and lifeless. By now, their bodies were half buried in the sand, with fingers still curling around weapons they were never going to use again, as Leo scoured them methodically, stripping belts, unfastening spatial pouches, checking boots and inside coats, as he looted everything he could find. Click. Rustle. Within minutes, he had gathered a small pile of mid-grade healing potions, stamina potions and mana potions, 1,000 days worth of field rations, half a dozen chocolate bars, 1,000 or so mid-grade mana stones and even a few dozen ice grenades. He pocketed most of the items, stuffing them into his spatial pouch and inner storage ring, leaving behind only 4 healing potions and a wrapped ration bar on the outside. Then, he returned to the unconscious girls, kneeling beside the silver-haired captain first, as he uncorked one of the healing potions and slipped a hand beneath her neck, lifting her head like she weighed nothing at all. The captain's body hung limp in his hands, offering no resistance, motionless and delicate, like a shattered porcelain doll, as tilting her head back with clinical care, he pressed the vial to her parted lips and slowly poured the potion past her soft jawline, guiding each drop with measured precision to avoid even a trace of spillage. However, since he was no expert in nursing, some of it still inevitably dribbled down her chin, staining her collar, but most of it made it down her throat in shallow gulps. Once finished, he let her head rest gently in the sand and moved to Della, as he repeated the same process. Wrist under her hair, potion to her mouth, controlled pour, shallow breaths. He watched them in silence, arms unmoving, fingers smeared with potion residue, as the wind stirred the blood-stained sand around them. However, as he nursed and cared for them, something within him stirred, something foreign and unusual, as he felt an uncomfortable feeling growing inside his chest. It wasn't attraction, nor affection, just warmth. A kind of quiet, aching warmth that hadn't stirred in him for years. And then he saw her, Amanda. Not as a memory, but as a presence. Like she was standing here before him, with her kind and vibrant eyes looking at him with the biggest smile on her face. Ha ha ha. Her laughter rang in his ear. The curve of her smile played in front of his eyes. And he could almost feel the way her fingers used to brush his cheek when she thought he was asleep. As that sensation hit him harder than any blade. He hadn't thought about her in years, hadn't let himself think. Yet here, in the middle of a cursed world, cradling two unconscious strangers, he found his mind drifting back to the girl he once swore he'd never leave behind. He didn't know whether it was grief, nostalgia, or just the simple cruelty of memory, but it clawed at his ribs like a dull blade. As he could do nothing but force himself to swallow it down. Not now, he told himself. This isn't the time. The scent of blood in the air thickened, it clung to his nostrils, metallic and heavy, mixing with the heat of the desert and the whispering winds that carried too many unseen dangers. Sandworms can come here at any moment, Leo thought, desperately trying to distract himself from the memory of Amanda, as he forced himself to think about other topics. He scanned the horizon. The dunes were still for now, but staying here meant asking for trouble. Hence, without another word, he stepped forward and bent down once more, hoisting Della over his left shoulder, and the captain over his right, as he decided to bring them to safety for now. Their combined weights still felt nothing to him compared to the weighted vests Major Hen made him wear at Rodova, as he began to walk once again. He didn't know where exactly these two ladies wanted to go, however, he assumed that they were here to complete the same mission as him, and hence he kept moving west towards the mountain ranges, which was the path to reach Castle Bravo. If the two didn't wish to continue with the expedition, they could walk back after they woke up, however, for now they came with him, as he tried to figure out why he was increasingly losing control over his emotions these days. Ever since he had gained the passive ability Monarch's Indifference, he had almost never had such an episode. However, as of late, he felt as though he had grown more and more sensitive again, and as if Monarch's Indifference had been slowly failing him for some reason. While Leo brushed off the feeling that perhaps Monarch's Indifference might be failing him fairly quickly, what he did not understand yet was that training the Sevenfold Revelation Codex and being constantly on the lookout to feel and experience emotions was slowly making him resistant to the technique. Ideally, Monarch's Indifference was supposed to be a passive skill that limited his range of emotions to about 10–20% of what he would usually feel, keeping him perpetually stoic and collected. However, using it while training the Codex was leading to momentary lapses where the skill stopped working for a few seconds before sputtering back to life again. The early sign of this phenomenon was how his old cocky personality was surfacing again and how he was experiencing life as a joyful ride again. However, although the changes were not fully noticeable yet, the first cracks had finally begun to show. Him missing Amanda today out of the blue was only the start, as the deeper his mastery of the Codex became, the weaker the passive of Monarch's Indifference was sure to grow, to the point where once he mastered the first layer of the technique, gaining a surface-level understanding of the 7 basic emotions, Monarch's Indifference could possibly turn from being a passive to an active skill for him, which he could activate or deactivate at will. Desert sand rustling. Leo walked with his usual soundless steps, as he left no deep trail, nor made any loud sounds that could attract unwanted attention. On his shoulders, the two unconscious women breathed steadily, their faces flushed and their bodies warm, as Leo carried them gently on his shoulders. He had been walking for over 4 hours, yet the two unconscious women still showed no signs of waking. By the time he estimated they had covered at least 10 to 12 kilometers, the weight on his shoulders had shifted from effortless to mildly annoying, Not because it tired him, but because it reminded him that the two were still dead weights on his shoulders in a world that punished weakness. The two of you better wake up before the kindness in my heart dies out, because just like how I have decided to save you on a whim, I may also dump you on a whim. Leo muttered, as he found a spot near the base of a weather-worn dune and set them down beside him with practiced care, brushing loose sand from their bodies before setting up a basic camp. He had paused to drink water and eat a brief meal, when he suddenly felt the ground beneath him rumble and shake. Screech. A low-frequency screeching sound filled his ears, as he immediately climbed the nearby dune to look towards the source of the sound, where he saw the giant sandworm being on the hunt for the first time ever. Thrum. The very ground beneath his feet trembled and shook as the sandworm surfaced. It was at least 20 feet long and 6 feet tall, and seemed to be on the hunt for a mid-sized desert porcupine that was merrily walking on top of a sand dune, until it panicked and began running when it felt the tremors intensify under it. Boom. The dune it was walking on exploded outward in a geyser of sand and grit as the sandworm erupted from below, its segmented body twisting mid-air like a massive, armored whip as it soared toward its prey. The sandworm's mouth opened to display a grotesque vertical split, revealing rows of sharp teeth rotating like drills, as with a sickening crunch, it swallowed the desert porcupine whole. One snap, one thrash, then gone. The beast vanished just as quickly as it had appeared, burrowing back into the earth in a whirl of collapsing sand, leaving only a crater and a faint tremor in its wake. Leo watched it all unfold with a calm, almost fascinated gleam in his eyes, his lips curling into a wide, boyish grin that he hadn't worn in years. Beautiful, he whispered under his breath, as a tingle of excitement ran down his spine. A proper predator. His fingers flexed by instinct, brushing the hilt of his dagger as his mind immediately began mapping out potential battle scenarios. If he were swallowed whole by the beast, he'd activate Dark Blade and carve a way out from inside, letting the cursed flames eat through flesh, gut, and bone. But ideally, he'd dodge the attack entirely. Ideally, if the sandworm tried to eat him, he would use Storm Flash Traverse to dance across the desert sand, keeping just ahead of its mouth, which was the worm's only true weapon, before unleashing 1,000 phantom slashes along its exposed length. Slice. Vanish. Reappear. Repeat. A high-speed, high-stakes ballet of death. A thrilling hunt, Leo mused, eyes still locked on the now settled sands. Maybe I should pick a fight with one of those sooner rather than later. He thought, when suddenly. Rustle. A faint stirring sound near him interrupted his thoughts, as he turned to look at its source. The captain groaned softly, her body twitching as her eyes fluttered open, pale lashes sticking together from dried sweat and blood. Leo watched as her gaze swam through confusion before landing on him, as she immediately grew alert, her hands searching for the weapons that were supposed to be in her storage pouch, however, were already removed by Leo for security reasons. Leo said nothing. He simply squatted calmly, one arm resting lazily across his knee, as he waited for the captain to regain her composure and initiate conversation when she was ready. For a while, the captain weighed her options, however, eventually as she looked at the unconscious Della beside her, then her surroundings, and then the black serpent guild robes on Leo's body, she let out a deep sigh before initiating conversation. I'm Captain Rima, and if I'm not wrong, you're Leo Skyshard. You have grown a stubble, but you still look like the circuit winner from Rodova that I saw on TV, Rima said, as Leo smiled wide for being acknowledged. Indeed, I am Leo Skyshard, the circuit's winner from Rodova. It's a pleasure to meet you, Captain Rima. Forgive me for taking away your weapons, I will return them to you once I assess that you won't turn and stab me in the back, Leo said with a smile, as he stood upright and calmly approached Rima with his hand extended. Karl Maxtern was a wanted criminal that the guild warned us about before we entered this world. He was a transcendent-level evil cult operative undercover as a cook, and it wasn't until your team entered this world that the guild found out about his truth, but by then it was too late to warn you guys about it. We never expected to encounter him here in the desert. But I guess such is fate, Rima said, as she sat upright and accepted Leo's outstretched hand for a handshake. I'm guessing you're the only survivor from your group. Or are Raiden and the others still alive? Rima asked, as Leo only shrugged his shoulders in response. Last I know, Raiden and Bob were still alive, but I'm not sure anymore. He replied, as Rima made an "oh" face, before immediately nodding in understanding. In the time-stilled world, luck was as fickle as the wind, and it seemed Raiden's team had run into the wrong kind of storm. Tell me more about Carl and the warning that the guild issued for him. What's all that about? Leo asked curiously, as he slowly retrieved the weapons he had plundered from Rima, including her broken spear, and placed it beside her one by one. There's a huge purge ongoing within the universal government. As you must already know, the evil cult has infiltrated our government quite deeply, so getting rid of their contacts is a priority. Rima began, as she gripped the short knives Leo had placed beside her and began stuffing them in her boots and around her utility belt. While purging one of the contacts, it was discovered that he had helped create a false identity for Carl, misidentifying him as a master-level warrior and a mercenary with an impeccable record, when in reality he was a wanted cult criminal. The Black Serpents received an emergency message from the government informing us to immediately arrest or neutralize the criminal. However, it was already too late by then. The rest of you had already entered the time-stilled world, and there was no way we could contact you. So the government instead issued an advisory for all new teams entering to be on the lookout for Carl, and to arrest him if possible, Rima explained, as Leo nodded in understanding. If the cult contacts were being purged at such an alarming rate, then there was a possibility that he himself might be exposed for his connection to me and Faye very soon. However, he seemed to be safe for now. So long as I maintain ties with the cult while living under the roof of the Righteous Alliance, I'll always be one slip away from exposure, or worse, capture. Once this mission is done, I need to sever one side cleanly and for good, Leo thought, as the weight of the double allegiance finally settled in his chest. The life of a double agent, he realized, was nothing more than a countdown masked in shadows, and he needed to get rid of such a life as soon as he was capable of it. Anyways, thanks a lot for saving us. This expedition is much more dangerous than we initially anticipated it to be. I personally do not have the courage to continue with this mission anymore. And would rather turn back now, while I still can. Rima said, as she twirled her silver pony in slight anxiety. That's a sound choice, Captain. I'd probably do the same if I were a sane man. But unfortunately I'm me, Leo replied casually, which caused Rima to chuckle. Of course the Great Circuit winner Leo Skyshard would press forward, Rima said, a soft flush rising to her cheeks as her expression eased into admiration. I expected nothing less, especially after watching you kill a transcendent with my own eyes. She leaned back, her voice laced with genuine awe. Do you know how rare that is? Warriors defeating someone a tier above them. You could count such stories on one hand and even fewer where a grandmaster takes down a transcendent. Leo chuckled at the praise but shrugged it off. It wasn't a fair fight. I struck when he was at his weakest. If I'd missed my moment, I'd be dead for sure, right alongside you and Della. Still, Rima said, her eyes lingering on him with a deeper glint, you're no ordinary fighter. Mr. Skyshard, and your hype is well deserved. A playful smirk tugged at her lips as her tone shifted. When I make it back out, I'll write a book about all this, and you'll be the main character in it. The mysterious assassin who slayed Karl Maxtern and saved me and Della from a certain death. Maybe I'll even spice it up with an extra R18 ending sequence. Leo arched a brow. I've heard fantasy sells better when there's a bit of romance in the mix, she continued, biting her lip slightly, her voice dropping half a pitch. And if we're parting ways soon, maybe we could give the readers something memorable to remember the book's end. She loosened the front of her robes just enough to expose the curve of her chest, her gaze holding his as she leaned in. 60 days without a single fling. Della's out cold. And you, Mr. Skyshard, you're a temptation walking. For a moment, Leo said nothing, his eyes drifting from her pale skin to the quiet hunger in her gaze. Desire stirred in his chest. It had been years since he'd touched someone, and in a place frozen outside of time, the idea of indulging felt almost consequence-free. Almost. But even as his pulse quickened, his thoughts anchored him. Amanda. He could never betray her, even if they were apart. He could never let her down by being carried away. Sigh. Leo exhaled softly, then shook his head. I'm flattered, Captain, he said gently. And if things were different, if I didn't already love someone, I'd never let a chance like this slip past me. He smiled faintly, eyes firm but kind. But I do. And I'm not the kind of man who betrays that. Rima's smile faltered, her hopeful spark dimming. For a beat, she looked away, adjusting her robes with a quiet sigh. Well, I'm disappointed, but I get it, she said, voice softer now. She's lucky. Not many men would say no, especially powerful and handsome men like yourself, when the girl is offering them a chance to do it without any consequences attached. Leo didn't respond, just met her eyes with a look of quiet respect. I hope you complete the mission, Leo, she said at last, her tone sincere. And more than that, I hope you make it back to her safe and sound. He gave her a nod and a small smile in return. And I hope you and Della make it home safely too. If fate permits it, I'll see you around on planet Twin Fang. After parting ways with Rima and Della, Leo returned to his predatory best, as he began to actively search for signs of sandworms to hunt. He felt a strange excitement building inside him as he searched for sandworm trails by lowering his head to the ground, trying to catch the faint tremors beneath the surface, as his senses sharpened with every heartbeat. Although he didn't fully understand it yet, something had definitely begun to shift within him over the past 200 days, ever since the first time he truly sensed killing intent, as it seemed like his entire mindset towards hunting had changed from before. Previously, his reason to hunt had always been tied to the practical outcomes of the hunt, but never to the act of hunting itself. It was like his motivation to kill was never rooted in the desire to destroy or to end life, but rather in the belief that killing was simply a necessary step toward achieving personal growth. So if he ever chose to kill a beast, it was not because he wanted to end its life, but because of what that action represented to him. As for him, killing a beast helped him sharpen his combat technique, hone his instincts, and push his mana heart closer to its limits. So it wasn't the act of killing itself that was most important to him, but rather the goals he could achieve from it, as the act itself was always secondary and incidental. His previous mindset was such that if he found there to be no tangible benefit tied to the hunt, then he simply walked away from it. However, this began to change ever since he witnessed killing intent for the first time. That moment had etched itself into his mind, and from that day onward, he found himself relentlessly chasing the feeling he experienced when he saw the color, blood red, for the very first time. For him, the first time he saw that color, was also the first time he stopped thinking about the outcome of the hunt and started enjoying the process itself. And although he had yet to truly grasp the meaning behind that shift, by continuing to chase that primal, vivid sensation, he was slowly inching closer to understanding the essence of killing intent. To kill for no reason at all, to destroy for the sake of destruction itself, that was the raw truth behind it. Killing intent wasn't a means to an end. It was the end, a manifestation of pure, undiluted destruction. Which was why the old Leo, who calculated every move and weighed every consequence, could never wield it consistently. But the new Leo, the one who had started to feel the thrill of the hunt for what it was, who had begun to indulge in the chase not for gain but for the joy of the kill, was now coming closer and closer to uncovering its truth. It took him about half an hour of relentless tracking to finally find a sandworm whose faint vibrations he could consistently follow, and about another half to bait it into surfacing, as he had no means of hunting it while it remained underground. He stomped his feet repeatedly on the loose desert sand, making as much noise as possible, sending rhythmic pulses through the terrain, until finally, he felt it. The tremors intensified, growing sharper, faster, and more deliberate with each passing second, as closing in from the northeast was a giant sandworm who had locked onto him as a target. Rumble. The earth around him began to shift, however, instead of running, he only smiled. Here it comes, he murmured, daggers already drawn, as he braced his feet and bent his knees ever so slightly, narrowing his eyes at the slowly warping sand. Boom. Without warning, the ground in front of him exploded into a pillar of sand and shattered stone, as a massive serpentine beast, at least 30 feet long, armored in thick, rust-colored carapace and lined with serrated, grinding teeth burst out of the ground with its maw wide open, hoping to bite into Leo. However, Leo was no longer there. Storm Flash Traverse. Flash. He disappeared in a ripple of crimson distortion, reappearing 4 feet to the side. Flash. Then again behind it, mentally locking new anchor points mid-air with razor-sharp focus. Flash. And again, this time mid-somersault above the beast's flank, as he conjured Dark Blade mid-flight, fusing it with 1,000 phantom strikes in one fluid burst. What followed was a flurry of movement too fast for the eye to catch. His body vanished and reappeared in fragments, each strike weaving seamlessly into the next, as black blade arcs layered upon one another in unpredictable patterns, flickering and overlapping until it looked like 10 Leos were carving through the sandworm's exposed side simultaneously. The illusion of numbers made it impossible for the creature to react, as its thick hide began to split open in glowing red lines, black blood spurting into the air as Leo continued to flash between preset anchor points with mechanical precision. By the time the sandworm realized it was under attack, Leo was already standing at its rear. Storm Flash Traverse ended with a final teleport back to solid ground, as the mana anchor points burned out in a gentle fizz of light, his mana reserves slightly winded but his mind still sharp. Behind him, the sandworm let out a low, gurgled screech, before its massive body collapsed sideways, its entire flank carved open with precise blade trails glowing with residual mana. As Leo looked back at his handiwork with pure joy in his eyes. Yes, he screamed in joy, happy to finally kill a sandworm exactly how he envisioned it, as this battle had already taken place 5 times in his head before turning into reality. On to the next kill. He buzzed, as he began running on the sand with joy, unaware that every inch of his skin, every fiber of his robe, even the tips of his daggers now glowed with a dull, blood-red shimmer, as the killing intent he had been chasing all this time now surged through him unrestrained. Slowly, but surely, he was coming closer to uncovering its secrets, and all he needed was one enlightening moment to realize killing intent for what it truly was. Over the next 2 days, Leo killed another 12 sandworms, while also successfully escaping from 2 that turned out to be transcendent tier creatures far beyond his current means. He didn't bother pushing his luck with them, choosing instead to bolt to safety the moment they emerged before him, as he used a combination of Storm Flash Traverse and Blade Switch to run to safety. It wasn't until the 13th one, the last kill of the second day, that something truly shifted. This time, after the battle ended and the beast lay eviscerated in the sand behind him, the feeling of bloodlust within him didn't fade. The blood-red aura clung to him, not just on his skin or blades, but in the air around him, as it wrapped around his limbs like a second robe, flickering faintly like heat waves on a summer road, yet cold and steady in presence. "Whoa, I'm covered in killing intent," Leo murmured, turning his hand slowly before his eyes, as he watched the faint shimmer pulse and twist with his movement. The aura covering him was different this time. It wasn't just a post-battle rush or residual energy, but rather a stable state that he seemed to have achieved on his own. The killing intent belonged to him now, and introspecting, he tried to understand why the change had occurred. For the next 2 minutes, he tried his best to decipher the secret behind this feeling. However, in the end he couldn't arrive at a conclusive result, and the blood-red aura dissolved to nothing yet again, vanishing like a whisper swallowed by the wind. "That's the longest I've been able to manifest killing intent," Leo muttered, as he exhaled through his nose and opened the codex once again, hoping to see some new text in it, something to guide him down the right path, and to his joy, new text had indeed appeared. As he opened the manual, new text slowly appeared in gold, offering guidance in its usual ominous style. Dash 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 dash. Greater than you no longer kill to grow. You no longer kill to learn. You no longer kill to test. You now kill because you want to. Because the act itself brings clarity. Because the hunt no longer needs a purpose. Your body remembers the rhythm. Your soul has tasted the joy. And now, the blood red refuses to fade. Greater than if you continue down this path, and indulge your desire to destroy to the extreme, a new world will slowly open for you. A world where the red shows you where to strike and how to destroy. However, once you reach that realm, there will be no coming back. And your understanding of the Codex will forever remain incomplete. Greater than for now, your understanding of the red is enough. Explore the 4 other colors you are missing first, before delving deeper into the shades of red. Leo read the words again. Then once more. And then frowned as he realized that the Codex was asking him to pause his pursuit of killing intent for now. The fuck? Some days you want me to understand killing intent more. But when I get closer to the truth you want me to stop. Just what the fuck do you want from me? Leo complained, feeling justifiably pissed as the aura covering his body turned maroon, once more, displaying his frustration. The Codex was the most confusing cultivation manual to ever exist, as Leo could never quite figure out what it really wanted him to do. The guidelines were vague. The progress was difficult to gauge. And eventually when he did reach close to a threshold, the manual asked him to take it slow and backtrack. How am I supposed to explore the other colors when you haven't even told me what the others are? He snapped, flipping back through the Codex as if expecting it to give up more answers if he just stared hard enough. Am I supposed to guess? Meditate in the desert until they show up one by one like collectibles. Is that your idea of a fucking tutorial? Leo cursed, as even though he knew that shouting would get him nowhere, he couldn't help but shout as the frustration in his chest threatened to bubble out of control if he did not. Fuck, what am I supposed to do now? Just stop killing until I figure out the other colors. But killing was the only fucking thing that brought me joy in life. Leo expressed, as he clutched his fingers and balled them tightly into fists. For a while, the maroons surrounding him grew larger and larger in size, until Monarch's indifference finally kicked in a couple minutes later and began stabilizing his mood and returning clarity to his mind. As it wasn't until he grew calm again, that he finally realized a key point that he had been unable to see for the last couple of days, ever since he began chasing the bloodlust like a madman. When was the last time I drank water? Leo asked himself, feeling the back of his parched throat, as he realized that he had not paused to rest or drink water in the last 2 days, and had also not slept a wink in the last 4. It was an almost relentless pursuit of the joy of killing, to the point where he absolutely forgot about everything else, including this world and his eventual goal of reaching the base of the mountain range, as he forgot about the mission completely. Hence it wasn't until Monarch's indifference kicked in, and he stopped blaming the Codex for being so vague and instead asked himself as to why he was so irritated at the idea of not getting to kill for a few days, that the truth finally hit him. He had grown addicted. At some point, without even realizing it, he had entered a trance-like state where everything else faded away. He had been chasing the thrill of death with tunnel vision, letting the rush of combat consume him completely. And now that he was thinking clearly, he realized just how dangerous that mindset truly was, as without even realizing, he had let himself be carried away by the bloodlust. Holy shit, maybe I do really need a break from killing, Leo realized, as he finally understood the many dangers of trying to master the sevenfold revelation codex, whereby constantly chasing a single emotion, one became blind to the fact that life was supposed to be a harmony of 7, and not the pursuit of 1. Time-stilled world, the arid desert, Leo's POV. After taking a short rest, Leo resumed his journey towards the base of the mountain, which now stood tall and imposing at the edge of the horizon, roughly 30 to 40 kilometers away. The shimmer of the mountain's presence became clearer with each step that he took across the desolate sands, as he had to restrain himself from going on another killing frenzy, which felt like a constant temptation tugging at his stomach. Apart from the urge to kill, Leo found the journey to be surprisingly straightforward, as there were no major distractions along the way, and his path remained mostly uneventful. With the desert sand occasionally brushing past him and the color of the sky barely shifting in the time-frozen world, he reached the base of the mountain in approximately 2.5 hours, his pace steady and uninterrupted. The Mountain of Illusions, that was what the ancient texts had called it. As according to scattered records from the old era, following the Great Dimming, this mountain was converted into a mass burial site, where local clans driven mad by illusionary forces turned on one another in blind violence, eradicating every last member of their kind. Since then, the mountain had earned infamy as a cursed land, one that devoured the minds of those who dared climb it. Even today, legend had it that anyone attempting the ascent of the mountain had to be wary of spectral entities and relentless hallucinations, as this mountain marked the most mentally grueling portion of the entire journey to Castle Bravo. The ancient texts warned that the closer one got to the castle, the more sinister the world became, and with the mountain being one of the last obstacles before the castle revealed itself, it was one of the most dangerous areas to enter, especially for solo adventurers. Well, if there's one thing I've got in abundance, it's mental fortitude. Leo whispered to himself, as he reached the base of the mountain and approached the start of the trail leading upwards. I already know the rules for survival here. Which is, hear no sounds, pay heed to no distractions and believe no lies you see. If I just follow that, I'll be okay. With that resolve in his heart, he began his climb along the broken stone path, its rough edges poking through the shifting dunes as nature had almost claimed the once carved road entirely over the long centuries of disuse. For the first 20 minutes, there were no real problems. However, after ascending approximately 400 crumbling steps, Leo began to notice a creeping fog dulling his clarity, as though the air itself carried some ancient toxin that was affecting his thoughts. His mind wandered toward grim subjects like, what is death? And, is there life beyond death? Which were philosophical tangents he had never indulged in, yet now found himself struggling to resist. Think nothing, hear nothing, believe nothing. He whispered the 3 rules again and again like a sacred mantra, repeating them under his breath as his boots crunched over old gravel and his gaze stayed firmly locked on the winding path ahead. Squoosh. Asterisk. A sudden gust of wind rushed past his face, sending a sharp chill rippling through his spine, as for the briefest moment, he was almost certain he saw something white streak past in a blur just ahead, something that did not belong to this world. Probably a spirit, Leo thought, keeping his body rigid and movements calm, as he chose to pretend he hadn't seen anything at all, as that was the exact strategy he had decided to employ today. I've seen enough horror movies to know exactly how the idiot main character dies, a weird sound, a flicker of something unnatural, and instead of ignoring it, they walk right toward it like clueless morons. If only they had a bit of sense, they wouldn't die in the first place. But I'm not like them. I will ignore all sounds and keep to myself. Leo maintained this internal monologue with grim amusement, ignoring the faint flickering of white shadows dancing in his periphery. Even as ghostly forms drifted silently through the air behind him, teasing and spiraling like mischievous wisps, he kept his eyes glued to the path ahead as if blind to everything else. Leo, my sweet Leo, a voice called out gently beside him, soft and painfully familiar. His breath caught slightly, not from fear, but from recognition, as he knew that the voice belonged to Amanda. Her voice carried the same warm tone, the same affection that used to wrap around his name like a soft blanket. Why won't you turn and look at me? She pleaded again, standing just out of sight. Leo gritted his teeth slightly and shook his head without speaking, forcing his legs to keep moving at the same pace. He had no doubt in his mind that if he turned, he would see Amanda, or at least a flawless replica of her, standing by the trail with outstretched arms and inviting eyes. But that was precisely why he did not turn. He knew he missed her too much. He knew that if he allowed himself even a glimpse of her form, emotions would rise within him that had no place in this world, emotions that could crack the focus he had built like armor around his mind right now. Logic reminded him that Amanda could not possibly be present in this time-frozen realm, and he repeated the truth silently to himself with every step, casting away the siren call of illusion as he focused on his breathing and the broken stone beneath his feet. Ain't nobody getting into my mind, Leo thought with a smirk, his pride swelling even as his shoulders remained tense and vigilant. Ghosts clouded his vision, swirling closer with every step, tugging at his robes, brushing his cheek with icy fingers. Elena, Luke, Jacob, Su Yong, Dumpy, Ben, even Sophia. One by one, the mountain conjured visions of those he cared for, crafting them with painful precision to tempt him from the path. But Leo refused to grant any of them a single glance. He kept walking at a steady pace, unshaken by the jargon surrounding him, as little by little, despite the whispers in his ears and the chill on his skin, he made his way up the mountain without any stoppages. Soon, the final steps of the first mountain on the chain faded behind him and the slope evened into a stretch of eerie flatland, and once he reached that milestone, the intensity of the ghosts distracting him reduced drastically as well. Phew. That was a handful, Leo finally exhaled in relief, thinking the worst was behind him. Yet just as his foot touched the plateau, the path ahead vanished, swallowed whole by an unsettling white mist that thickened with every passing breath. Then, from the veil of fog, a figure emerged, ancient, unmoving, and entirely out of place. Perched atop a weathered boulder with one leg folded neatly over the other, a ghostly figure sat with unsettling poise. 6 arms rested across his knees and chest in perfect symmetry, while 3 serene yet sunken faces extended from a single neck, each bearing a long white beard that flowed down to the waist. Blood-red eyes flickered open across all 3 faces at once, piercing through the fog and locking onto Leo without hesitation. "Welcome to the Passage of Wisdom," the figure muttered in a low, vibrating tone, his voice echoing unnaturally across the empty expanse. "Only those worthy may pass." Leo blinked, unimpressed, and replied with casual irritation, "Yeah, no thanks." Then he turned his body and walked straight into the fog ahead, choosing to ignore the theatrics entirely. But as he moved ahead, the white mist began to curl around him like strands of silk, soft yet suffocating, while the air grew thinner and the silence deepened, as if the very world had twisted in on itself. And within moments, the path straightened once more, only for him to realize he was standing in the exact same place as before. Same fog, same rock, same ancient ghost with 6 arms and blood-red eyes. Only this time, the middle head was smiling, as if it found amusement at Leo's failure to flee. Leo's eye twitched slightly as he stopped walking, realizing that brute stubbornness and blind faith in the "ignore it and it'll go away" strategy had finally met its match, and that finally, he would have to acknowledge the presence of a specter. Time-stilled world, the mountain of illusions, the spectral plateau. Once Leo realized that he couldn't get past this particular ghost without indulging it, he surrendered to his fate and asked, "All right, tell me, how do I prove I'm worthy enough to pass?" The 3-headed specter did not move. For a moment, only the wind stirred, brushing gently across the flatland like the breath of a forgotten god. Then the leftmost head finally spoke, its voice calm and velvet smooth. "You may pass by proving that your mind sees more than what is shown." The right head picked up immediately, tone raspier, like the scrape of stone on metal. "That you can pierce deception not with sword or skill, but with stillness and perception." And at last, the central head leaned forward, blood-red eyes glowing slightly brighter. "We shall each speak in turns. One of us lies. 2 of us speak the truth. Uncover the fraud 3 times in a row, and the path ahead shall open. Fail, and you will be forced to turn back, with the mountains dead trailing behind you. This time with the intent to kill." Leo frowned when he heard the last line. The mountains dead trying to chase and kill him. That did not sound like a good outcome at all. However, he did not have much other choice but to accept the ghost's conditions. The thick mist that he ran into moments ago was now surrounding him on all sides, and something about this old ghost's gaze told him that regardless of where he ran, he would always end up before it, until he gave it what it wanted. "Great. So the 3-headed ghost wants me to play a game of 2 truths and a lie, but with my own life on the line." Leo mused, as he looked around, trying to confirm one last time as to whether or not he could run away from this situation without facing it. Before sighing and nodding his head, when he realized that he could not simply run away from it. "Fine, let's get this over with," he said, agreeing to the terms and conditions of the ghost, as the air around him immediately turned denser and the 3 heads before him began to laugh in synchronization. Dash 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 dash. Round 1. For the first round of the game, the left head went first, speaking with the cadence of an old storyteller. In a city that's now buried beneath ice, there once lived a race of architects who built towers upside down after this world broke, believing that heaven was below and hell was above. When outsiders eventually arrived at their town, they called the architects heretics and devil worshippers. However, when they chased them inside the upside-down towers to punish them, those that went in never came out. It's said that the towers are a direct gateway to the afterlife, and that no soul who enters it can leave it alive. The middle head followed, his tone softer, melancholic. After this world broke, a great king ordered every book in his kingdom to be rewritten so that his name would appear in every victory, every miracle, every sacred text that had ever occurred in the history of this world. He became audacious and leveraged the silence of the old gods to proclaim himself the new god. However, because of his ambition, the soul of the dead god Zonrock punished him. And when he died, his soul was forcibly scattered across the rewritten stories. Now, any child who reads the forbidden texts aloud speaks in his voice and forgets their own for 3 days, as they are forced to anchor his anguished soul as a reminder to not learn wrong history. Then, finally, the right head spoke. There was once a man who carried a mirror across the broken world, showing people who had lost themselves to the tainted mana their truest selves. Most begged to look, some broke down in tears, others attacked him in rage. However, it wasn't until he saw his own reflection in the mirror that it finally cracked. When asked what he saw, he said, "Nothing. I was never real to begin with." Leo stared at them, then blinked, then stared some more. All 3 stories echoed with the same eerie quality, they all sounded mythical, poetic, and unnerving. Each one had just enough logic to feel feasible in a twisted world like this, and just enough nonsense to make him question everything. He ran the stories through his head again, trying to dissect them. Blind architects. Haunted books. A mirror that shattered on self-viewing. Leo scratched the side of his head and let out a small frustrated breath. How the hell am I supposed to figure this out? They all sound equally garbage to me. He turned away, then turned back, then circled slightly around the ghost, trying to see if one of the heads was sweating or twitching or doing anything remotely suspicious. But he found no telltale signs of lying on any of them. All 3 looked as smug and unreadable as ever, as they maintained eye contact with him regardless of where he moved. Thud. Eventually, Leo sat down cross-legged before the ghost, as he rubbed his temples in perplexity. This isn't a riddle. It sounds more like a fever dream. Something that's randomly made up in sleep, Leo muttered, as he tried to probe the heads into revealing more information about the stories they just narrated. However, the heads maintained their silence. No matter how long Leo stared at one of them, or how he tried to engage them in conversation, the heads said nothing, as they waited in silence until Leo made his final choice. Fuck, this is hard, Leo thought, as while on one hand, he wanted to trust his gut and just blurt out the answer that seemed most suspicious to him. His gut was unfortunately yelling 3 different things at once today. Maybe the mirror guy's story is real. In a place like this, where tainted mana distorts the soul, a mirror that reflects your true self could be powerful enough to shatter psyches. And the part where he saw nothing. That doesn't make it fake. It could mean he really was hollow, a construct or a ghost, never truly alive in the first place. That feels haunting, but possible. The king's story sounds insane, but then again, so is this world. After the old gods went silent, maybe someone did try to erase and rewrite history to crown himself a divine figure. The punishment, having his soul forcibly scattered through the texts he defiled, doesn't sound made up either. It's poetic justice. And if those cursed books still exist, maybe reading them does let him speak again, even if just for a few days. That's not impossible, just terrifying. Even the upside-down towers could be true. If an isolated civilization went mad after the world broke, their logic might have flipped too. Building downward, toward what they believed was salvation, it's deranged, sure, but not beyond belief. And if the towers do lead to some kind of metaphysical realm, then maybe that's why nobody ever returned. Not because the story is false, but because it's working exactly as intended. He frowned, biting the inside of his cheek, genuinely unsure. All his training, all his instincts, all his cold-blooded calculation, appeared to become useless in this situation, as in the end he felt like he was going to be forced to make a simple guess and nothing more. He couldn't even tell if he was being toyed with, if any of the stories that he heard here today were even genuine, or if all three of them were a lie, and regardless of what he said he was going to lose. As that, more than anything, made him feel like he was genuinely stuck in a tough spot, as this wisdom test turned out to be much more complicated than he had initially expected it to be. Time-stilled world, the spectral plateau, round 1 of questioning. Leo remained seated, legs crossed and brow furrowed, the silence between him and the specter growing heavier with each passing second, as though even the air around them had paused to await his decision. He had run through each story in his mind again and again, searching for a crack, a misstep, a hidden clue buried beneath their myth-like cadence. The tale of the architects seemed almost plausible in a world this fractured, where madness often became logic and belief could warp reality itself. He could genuinely believe that there did exist a broken tribe somewhere in this world that would have tried to dig downward toward what they believed was salvation, when the sun disappeared. However, perhaps it was because the story was too believable that he wondered if it was a trap. In contrast, the king's story was drenched in arrogance, ambition, and poetic punishment, and yet something about it also made no sense. According to the ancient records he read, there was no mention of any ancient king that did something like this. Nor did it seem like Zarnik was in a state where he could dish out such petty punishments after losing his physical body. The story itself sounded like a folklore straight out of a children's book. And somehow Leo couldn't make his mind on whether it was true or not. And finally there was the Mirror Man's tale, hollow and haunting, speaking of self-reflection and erasure, yet somehow lacking the same weight as the others, as though it was a fabricated lie while the other two were anchored in reality. It was the only tale where the main subject of the story was kept vague, as if the specter was trying to cover a wide base without being specific, so that its lie could pass as the truth. And while being vague was a telltale sign of lying, Leo knew that it could also be a trap, which was why in the end he did not feel confident in locking the third choice either. Sigh. He exhaled slowly, then whispered under his breath, "It's either the second or the third. I have a strong feeling it can't be the first," but even as he said it, the words felt unsatisfying. Because his gut refused to pick one over the other, and despite all his instincts, calculations, and learned caution, Leo couldn't bring himself to stake his life on a blind guess. "I can't gamble here," he murmured to himself, shaking his head slightly. "Not like this, not when failure means being hunted down by the dead." And then, like a glint of sunlight breaking through the clouds, a memory stirred within him. A memory of his recent conversation with the old dragon, where the old beast had once mentioned that if Leo could master the codex, he would be able to tell truth from illusion, to distinguish the real from the fabricated, not just in objects or people, but perhaps in the very fabric of stories themselves. Leo blinked, the realization snapping into place with unexpected clarity. Right, he whispered internally, a quiet intensity settling into his thoughts, the codex. If he could perceive the aura of a liar from the specter as it narrated the stories, perhaps he could find a way to move forward without having to gamble his life on it. "Yes, that's the best shot I have," Leo concluded, as he stood up slowly and faced the ghost once more. This time not with uncertainty, but with quiet resolve. "Can you please repeat the stories for me? I need to hear them again to confirm what I already know," he said, his tone firm but not confrontational, more a request than a demand. The three-headed specter tilted its skulls in eerie synchrony, as if amused by the audacity of his ask, yet it made no protest, and once again began its strange recitation. But Leo no longer listened with his ears alone. He had already been watching the specter with mana pooled behind his eyes, when it narrated the story the first time, but this time he tried the hardest to blur his vision and only focus on the faint outlines surrounding the ghost, which he presumed to be its aura. At first he saw nothing much, just the same skin color aura blurring just beyond its illusion of a flesh, as he focused on nothing but the faint boundary between where the specter's outline ended and where its aura should be. The first head began to speak again, about the buried city, the upside-down towers, the gateways to the afterlife, and as Leo listened, he noticed a subtle ripple of tension in the specter's aura, not hostile or deceitful, but warped with pride, as though the speaker reveled in the strangeness of its tale. The aura surrounding its body remained unnoticeable till the end, however, just at the end, he perceived a slight splash of black that disappeared as soon as it appeared. The second head followed, recounting the king who rewrote history and was punished by a forgotten god, and here the aura shifted once more, duller this time, laced with a bitter sorrow that hinted at regret or remembrance, as though the story bore the weight of real consequence. The second head's aura also did not change throughout his speech, however, just towards the end, it also flickered with a faint splash of black. Finally the third head began its tale last, as it talked about the man in his mirror, and Leo narrowed his gaze once again and followed the story till the end, right until the final moment where the story concluded and the third head's aura flickered black as well, just like the other two before it. The hell? Leo cursed, a frown developing on his face, as he did not expect this outcome at all. All the three ghosts gave off the same aura at the end of their stories, which did not help him narrow down his suspects at all. However, this turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Looking towards his own body, Leo focused on the fringes of his finger and mentally began to speak truths and lies alternatively. I don't miss my family at all. I wonder if Dumpy is alive and okay. I have never thought about shoving an umbrella into Professor David's rear end. I am scared of death. His reasoning behind this experiment was to check as to whether or not his own aura flared black when he lied versus when he did not, and although he did not notice any results for the first 10 or so lies he spoke, when he finally spoke the 11th, he noticed the faintest flicker of black emerge around his fingers. Huh, was that it? Did I finally succeed? Leo wondered in joy, as he felt encouraged and continued on with the method for a while longer. Until he could continuously perceive a faint flicker of black emerge at his fingertips every time he lied. This might be it, but I need to look into the codex to confirm. Leo concluded, as he reached into his storage ring and retrieved the Sevenfold Revelation Codex at once. Time-stilled world, the spectral plateau, Leo's POV. Leo opened the Sevenfold Revelation Codex with a breathless urgency, his fingers grazing the familiar parchment as he silently hoped for guidance, some sign or revelation inked onto the page. To his relief, golden ink began to bleed into view the moment the cover fell open, swirling like liquid flame as the codex stirred to life and prepared to impart its newest lesson. Greater than, you have observed the shade, black, which is the echo of dishonesty. Greater than, it is not the mark of sin, nor of wickedness, but is rather the signature of dissonance. Greater than, when the soul speaks a truth, the aura holds steady. Greater than, when it utters a lie it recognizes as false, the soul recoils. Greater than, this recoil, though imperceptible to flesh, stains the aura at its thinnest edge. Greater than, it cannot be hidden by confidence or smothered by repetition. Greater than, it appears only when the speaker knows they lie. Greater than, the unaware are spared. Greater than, the deceivers are not. Greater than, to see black is to witness fracture, the instant a soul shudders against its own voice. Greater than, one must always beware of lies and liars, as those who lie too often, usually have the darkest souls. As the final line unfurled in brilliant script, the glow slowly dimmed and the golden ink faded, retreating like a tide returning to its depths, as the codex returned to silence once again. Leo did not move for several seconds after reading the text. His eyes remained fixated on the now empty page, as his breathing slowed and his mind raced. He understood now that the black aura did not mark wrongness in the world, but wrongness in the speaker, when what they said was at odds with what they knew to be true. And yet, that only made things harder. He had seen the same faint black flicker at the end of all three stories. But if the codex was right, and it always was, then none of the specters' heads had told the full truth. Which meant, They're all lying, Leo murmured aloud, frowning. But they all sounded too grounded to be completely false. He fell silent again, fingers absently tapping the cover of the codex. And then it struck him, not as a flash of brilliance, but the slow, creeping realization of something subtle he had missed. Each story had felt grounded, logical, believable. But what if that was the trap? What if the first parts of each tale were true, details woven from real history, real events, but the final lines were where the falsehood lived? He closed his eyes and ran through them again. Greater than the architects, lived in a city buried beneath ice. They built upside-down towers, believing heaven was below. But then the line that, the towers are gateways to the afterlife, from where no soul returns. That was when the speaker's aura flickered black, meaning that it was the lie. Same for the king's story. Greater than he rewrote all the books. He declared himself God. But then, his soul was scattered and children spoke in his voice. That was the line where the speaker's aura broke, indicating that it was a lie. And finally the mirror man. Greater than he carried a mirror to show people their true selves. He made the broken weeper rage. But then, he saw nothing, because he was never real. That final line was again a lie. Meaning that all three statements made by the heads consisted of exactly two truths and one lie. Leo opened his eyes. That's it, he whispered, voice low. They're not full lies. Just partial ones. Each of them ends with a twist that breaks from the truth. And when the truth breaks, the soul recoils. And when the soul recoils, the aura turns black. He looked back at the ghost, this time not with confusion, but with a grim certainty building behind his eyes. Because now he understood the truth. I am ready to answer, he said, eyes locking onto the central skull of the specter. The three heads turned in perfect, eerie synchrony, their gazes piercing through the mist between them like blades. Then speak, mortal, the left head rasped. Which tale was false? Asked the middle. Choose wrong, and you shall be punished, whispered the right. But Leo didn't flinch, nor did he hesitate, not anymore. All three stories are lies, he said calmly, his tone not loud but sharp enough to cut the stillness. But not completely. The specter tilted slightly, the sockets of its many eyes narrowing. Go on, the middle head coaxed, curious now, its voice laced with both intrigue and warning. Leo took a breath. They each contain two truths. But at the end of each story, there is a lie. He pointed toward the ghost. You said this game was two truths and a lie, but you never explained what it actually meant. And I believe, the true game is to discern the two truths and the one lie inside every story that you narrated. The fog thickened for a beat, curling around Leo's boots as though waiting for him to slip, but he held his ground. The architects did build their city beneath the ice. They did believe in heaven below. But the towers weren't gateways to the afterlife, that was a lie. The king did rewrite history. He did crown himself God. But his soul wasn't scattered, and children don't speak in his voice. That was the lie. And the mirror man, yes, he showed others who they were. Yes, they broke because of it. But he did exist. He wasn't a ghost story. That was the lie. The moment he finished speaking, the wind stilled. The fog stopped moving. The plateau itself seemed to freeze, caught in a breath that the world had forgotten to exhale. And then, the specter moved. Its three heads turned inward, facing each other, whispering in overlapping tones that sent shivers crawling across Leo's skin. There was no anger in their muttering. Only surprise. And something dangerously close to amusement. When they turned back to him, the center head leaned forward ever so slightly. Correct, it said, voice deeper than before, carrying a strange note of approval. We did not expect you to solve this riddle, mortal, but you are smarter than we expected. You live to face question 2. A wave of silent relief coursed through Leo's chest as the verdict was spoken, but he dared not let it show. He'd gambled everything on the Codex's teachings, and on his own ability to see aura beyond the limits of normal eyes. And it had worked. Yet, the sense of victory was fleeting. Because as soon as the specter recognized his first triumph, the fog around it began to move again. The three heads rose higher, their silhouettes now barely distinguishable from the thick gray clouds that churned behind them, until only the red embers of their sunken eyes remained visible, like coals drifting in ash. Your mind is sharp, the left head said, voice trailing like smoke. But solving one riddle does not make you worthy of passage, said the right. You must answer the second riddle now, or be forced to turn back and chased, said the one in the center, as the three heads began narrating the next riddle. Listen carefully to the rules of the second round, mortal, for this time we shall not repeat ourselves, the middle head intoned, its voice curling through the mist like a whisper at the edge of thought. The second question is a test of logic, not insight. There is only one riddle, and only one correct answer. The fog coiled tighter around the specter until its form vanished entirely, replaced by nothing but gray swirling smoke, as even its eyes were gone. Leo could no longer see even the faintest outline of the ghost, and could hence no longer rely on the codex to help him answer this one. It seemed like the ghost had figured out his cheat, and had slammed the door shut against him being able to use it again by completely covering its body with thick fog. A sellsword is placed in a chamber with 3 chairs. In the first sits a king who offers him gold for protection against his enemies. In the second, a merchant who offers twice that for silence and discretion. And finally, in the third, a farmer who offers nothing, but weeps in fear and prays to the gods for survival. The door to the chamber only opens after the sellsword kills one of the 3. However, if he chooses to kill none, then all 4 of them starve and die. He cannot leave without choosing. He cannot kill more than one. But whichever he kills, the remaining 2 will walk free and live long lives. So who does he kill, if he is both rational and kind-hearted? The ghost asked, as an eerie silence followed his words. Leo narrowed his eyes. This time, the answer would not come from observation, and he had to rely on nothing but his own wits to get to the solution, as there was no room to cheat anymore. Dash 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 dash. The words of the riddle echoed through his mind, over and over, as he let the image form fully in his head. A king, a merchant, a farmer. One offered gold for protection. One offered more for silence. While the last offered nothing and just trembled in fear. Only one could die. The other 2 would live. And the sellsword, if rational and kind-hearted, had to decide which one to kill. Rational and kind-hearted, Leo repeated internally, as he considered each option. The king was a powerful man, who offered gold to be protected, likely out of fear that his enemies would assassinate him. His survival maintained order in the world, and could serve as a greater good, for when a king died an untimely death, bloodshed usually followed. The merchant was a greedy man, who offered more gold than the king not for protection, but for silence and discretion, an act that reeked of guilt more than fear. However, clients like the merchant were what the sellsword profession was made for. And it wasn't up to the sellsword to judge what the client did after paying them. Finally, the farmer was a poor man, who offered nothing, not out of arrogance but because he had nothing to give. He wept not with strategy, but with raw fear as he turned to the gods and begged for mercy. Leo's brow furrowed as the layers began peeling back in his mind. If the sellsword is only rational, he might take the highest bidder. That's the merchant. Twice the gold. Easy. If he is only kind-hearted, he might refuse to kill altogether, but the riddle forbids that. He has to choose. Doing nothing is not an option. So what choice protects the innocent and punishes the corrupt, with the least cost to the world? Leo wondered, as he thought long and hard about the question, before simply deciding on the answer based on what he would personally do, if placed in this situation. He himself was an assassin, and while he did not consider himself to be kind-hearted, he was not cruel or irrational. Hence he just thought about what he would personally do if placed in this situation, and finally locked on an answer after just 20 short minutes of thinking. I've made my choice, he declared. Then speak, the specter replied, its voice thick with smoke and shadow. Leo didn't flinch. The sellsword kills the farmer, he said, his voice firm. Because the farmer has nothing to offer, no leverage, no power, not even a deal. I know how a sellsword thinks. Gold talks. Fear doesn't. The king pays for protection, the merchant pays more for silence, but the farmer, he only weeps. And weeping doesn't feed steel. The answer of the question is in the name of the profession itself. Sell sword. We do what we do for money, and as being kind-hearted or cruel has no bearing on it, he declared confidently, as a stillness followed. Correct, the middle head finally said, its tone unreadable, as the fog around its face finally receded, and the three heads came back into view once more. You live to face question 3. The left head said, as without wasting any time, they immediately jumped onto the third and last question, as the specter's form disappeared completely from in front of Leo, and its voice began to ring out from multiple angles in Leo's vicinity, as if hundreds were surrounding him from beyond the fog. Listen well, mortal, for this is not a riddle born of trickery, but one born of ache. There were once 3 brothers, the voice began, not in unison, but in overlap, 3 voices sharing the same breath, layering on top of each other like chords from a mournful hymn. 3 souls bound in one body, conjoined from the neck downward, trapped in flesh they did not choose. They had 3 minds, 3 heads, 3 dreams, but only one life, one pair of lungs, one fate. They learned to live together, to eat together, to fight together, but never to love together. For there was a woman, a kind woman, gentle, strong, and radiant in a way that made all 3 believe she saw them, truly saw them. And she did love one of us. But which one? The voice fractured, splitting fully into 3 separate tones now, each echoing from a different direction in the mist, as if the brothers were pacing through Leo's surroundings, invisible yet omnipresent. I was the first to notice her smile, the left voice claimed, calm and wistful. She laughed at my jokes, lingered on my words, and her hand would brush mine when she thought the others weren't looking. She asked for my stories, listened to my dreams. She saw me. And when her mother fell ill, it was me she came to for comfort, not the others. I was the one she sought when her heart was heavy, said the middle voice, deeper and steadier. She would rest her head near my shoulder, speak softly when the others had fallen asleep. She once pressed a note into our hand, but I was the one who read it first, and it was signed with my name. Not a mistake. A confession. I was the one who touched her soul, the third voice whispered, trembling. I painted for her. She cried when I gave her a portrait of the sea, because I remembered she had never seen it. She kissed our cheek once, under the lilac tree, and I felt it burn my skin. She never looked at the others that way again. And yet, the 3 voices rejoined, low and heavy now, when her end came, when the fever took her and she lay dying, she pulled us close. She whispered her heart's truth. But we do not remember. Grief swallowed the moment, and we have fought ever since, believing it was each of us. But it was only one. And now, you must tell us. A sudden hush swept the air, sharp and complete. Then, softly, the question came. To which brother did she confess her love on her deathbed? Time-stilled world, the spectral plateau, Leo's POV. Leo felt the pain hidden behind the voices of the specter as they presented the third riddle. This was definitely by far the most complex riddle he had heard, not because it was particularly witty, but because it was deeply human. It wasn't a question of logic, or deduction, or perception. It was a question of understanding hearts. Of choosing which love was real, when all 3 brothers had believed with equal desperation that they were the one she adored. Leo closed his eyes, allowing the silence to settle, not rushing to an answer as he tried to empathize with each story. The first brother had claimed her love because she laughed with him the most and because she came to him when her mother was sick. The second insisted she loved him because she always looked for him in a crowd, confided her deepest secrets to him and enjoyed his warmth and comfort. The third believed it was him, because she had kissed him and no other, and because she looked at him with eyes that were different from the other 2. They all had valid reasons. But love, true love, was rarely about reason. Leo's thoughts drifted to something Elena once said to him when he was but a teenage child. If you ever wish to know who someone loves, watch who they protect in their weakest hour. It was a comment she made in passing, however, it was a comment that stayed with him for life. What Mom said back then is definitely the truest test of love. If there was a room full of people I loved the most, and an explosion suddenly occurred that blew everyone backwards. Who would I glance at first after I look up? That's definitely the person I love the most, Leo thought, as inadvertently, his thoughts shifted to Amanda, the love of his life. And this time, he didn't fight it. He didn't shut the door on the pain, or bury the memories beneath layers of cold pragmatism. He let them wash over him fully, raw, wild, unfiltered, as images of her smile, her voice, and every stolen moment they shared bloomed behind his eyes. She wasn't perfect. She wasn't always the most elegant or practical. But she was herself, and to Leo, that had always been enough. He remembered the way she'd grip his hand when he ate his food too fast, glaring at him to finish the food in his mouth first, before scooping another spoonful. He remembered the way she'd sit with him in silence after a rough day, no questions asked. The way she lit up whenever she spoke about her dreams, even if she knew they may never come true. He loved her, not because she completed him, or made him feel whole, but because her happiness mattered more to him than his own. Because if protecting her meant becoming a monster for the whole universe, he wouldn't hesitate in being one. Because he knew, deep in his soul, that if everyone else was falling, she'd be the one he'd look for first. He would do anything for her. Even if she never looked at him the same way. Even if she forgot him entirely. Even if loving her tore him apart. And as those thoughts crystallized into something undeniable, something true, Leo failed to notice the soft ripple of color blooming around him. A gentle pink aura, warm, quiet, and impossibly pure, began to rise from his skin like a breath in winter air, glowing brighter with every heartbeat. It wasn't rage. It wasn't grief. It was love, in its most vulnerable form. Love that asked for nothing. Love that simply was. But Leo remained oblivious to it, eyes closed, heart open, as he began to truly feel the weight of the riddle again. 3 brothers. 3 hearts. 1 woman. The first had spoken of laughter and loyalty in times of need. The second had spoken of comfort and emotional intimacy. The third had spoken of gifts and physical intimacy. But none had spoken of what they lost. True love was not a competition. True love was being happy even if the person they loved was with someone else. As wanting someone to be happy only when they were with yourself wasn't true love, but rather obsessive self-love. All of you. She loved all of you, but none of you truly loved her, Leo responded at last as he opened his eyes and gazed straight into the fog ahead of him, at the spot where the specter had initially vanished from. She treated all 3 of you kindly, and showed a different side of her to you based on what would feel endearing to you. But I don't believe any of you loved her, because if you did, you wouldn't be fighting amongst yourself trying to prove that she loved just one. But would rather be happy that she had a heart big enough to love all 3, Leo said in a somber voice, as a small tear formed in his own eyes. This was not an answer he gave from his mind, but rather one that he gave from his heart, based on his own understanding of true love, and his feelings for Amanda. It was not an answer that he felt particularly confident in, especially in a test of wisdom. However, it was an answer that he believed in, because it was in line with his own understanding of true love. For a long moment, there was no reply. Just silence. Heavy, trembling silence that clung to the spectral plateau like dew over a field of graves. Then, without warning, the fog ahead stirred, tugged apart as though drawn back by unseen hands, as the specter reappeared, emerging slowly into view. But this time, something was different. The specter's form no longer stood tall and accusatory, as its very posture had changed. Its eyes, 3 sets glowing dimly across 3 conjoined heads, were no longer searing with an angry glowing red. Instead, each head turned toward the other, not in challenge, but in shame. Their once bright red gaze dimming to a dull brown, as for the first time since Leo arrived, none of them could meet his gaze. Each pair of eyes slowly dropped to the ground, heavy with guilt, as their faces began to change. The withered beards and deep lines began to fade. The warped skin, clouded eyes, and ghostly age peeled away like dried paint revealing a canvas underneath, until, for a fleeting moment, Leo saw the specter as it once was. 3 handsome young men, identical in body, unique in expression. One with an impish grin. One with a calm and thoughtful gaze. one with a shy, boyish smile. And in that moment of clarity, unmarred by time, by madness, or by cursed mana, Leo finally saw not monsters, not riddlers, not specters, but men. Broken, and regretful men. The leftmost head spoke first, voice cracking as though remembering how to be honest. "You're right," he whispered. "We didn't truly love her. Not the way she deserved." The middle head closed his eyes, as if in pain. "This world's mana, it twisted us. Our thoughts. Our hearts. It fed our jealousy, made our minds unravel over the centuries, until we could no longer hear her voice. Only each other's accusations." And the rightmost head finished the truth. "We murdered her." His words fell like stone. "Because we couldn't bear the idea that she loved one of us more. It's the one act we regret beyond all others. We haven't left from this place in over 3,000 years. We've stood guard beside her grave, trying to remember her face. Trying to atone for what we did. Trying to believe she might forgive us from beyond the grave someday." As his voice faded into the wind, the plateau itself began to tremble, softly at first, like a heartbeat finally returning to a dying body. Then the stone beneath their feet shimmered, its dull gray hue beginning to shift and reshape, cracks etching through the fog-laced ground as glowing inscriptions of an ancient tombstone emerged. "In memory of Ruth. Delicate. Honest. Eternal. You're a better man than we are. Mortal. You have earned our respect, and the right to pass. No specter shall trouble you on your journey from this point onwards," the central head said, as the fog receded completely, unveiling the straight path ahead, and the broken outline of a faraway castle. Time-stilled world, beyond the spectral plateau, Leo's POV. It wasn't until Leo crossed the spectral plateau that he opened the codex yet again, to confirm his uncovering of the fifth aura color. He had not been expecting to uncover 2 aura colors in such rapid succession. However, the test of wisdom had really turned out to be a surprise boon for him. Glow. Golden ink glowed on the empty white pages of the codex as soon as he opened it, as the manual did indeed acknowledge his observation of the fifth aura color. Dash 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 dash. Greater than you have spotted. Pink, the color of love. Greater than love is a force without shape, but not without weight, and its aura doesn't stain, but it lingers. Greater than love grants the strength to carry burdens no man should carry, and endure storms no soul should endure. Greater than it sharpens resolve. It softens rage. It gives birth to sacrifice. Greater than to love truly is to give without measure, to protect without pride, to remain, when all reason demands you leave. Greater than but blind love is not sacred. Greater than blind love is wrought. Greater than it leads men to betray their morals, abandon their purpose, and lose themselves in the shadows of another's light. Greater than discernment is the balance. Greater than to walk forward with love in your heart, without losing sight of your path, is the true test of life. Greater than for love is as pure as it is dangerous. Dash 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 dash. The ink dried as quickly as it had appeared. The page stilled. And Leo, now staring at the soft golden glow of the completed script, let out a long, happy breath. That makes it 5. I have finally spotted 5 of the 7 colors needed to complete the first level of the codex. Leo rejoiced, as he finally grasped yet another aspect of this manual. Progress with this technique was slow and laborious when he had no breakthroughs. However, when enlightenment struck, he had managed to understand 2 colors within the span of 2 hours. No wonder the manual warned that Caliph is the only one to ever master this technique. If one is unlucky, they can be stuck at a stage for years. However, if they have high comprehension and luck, they can complete a stage within a month. Leo muttered, as he shook his head from side to side and set his sights on the broken castle, now visible about 2 mountain lengths away. If there were truly no more obstacles in his path, just as the specter had implied, then he could likely reach the entrance in a day, or at most, a day and a half. However, knowing this was the most dangerous part of his mission, and that the soul of an ancient god awaited him within, Leo decided it would be wiser to approach only after he was fully rested and alert. As there was no telling what kind of horrors might await him once he arrived. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Meanwhile, back on planet Twin Fang, the Guildmaster's office. Dupravel's office was dead silent, save for the constant munching sound of someone chewing on wood, as Dupravel, after losing bits of his sanity, snacked on the wooden pencils placed on his desk as if they were snacks. Antonio stood by the doorway, his hands clasped behind his back, watching his old friend eat wood with pity and compassion in his eyes, as he spoke with a softness reserved for children and madmen. The universal government has begun their assault on planet Juxta, he said gently, watching Dupravel with cautious eyes. One of their key military objectives is to retrieve Darnell. They've listed it in their war agenda. Dupravel didn't move. He sat hunched forward in the reinforced chair Antonio had custom ordered after his mind began to unravel, designed specifically to endure the pressure of his elongated nails and the deep scratch marks he left behind. He looked like a caveman, with wild hair, a thick, unkempt beard, and shoulders draped in the ragged cloak of a creature that had long abandoned any trace of gentlemanly posture. As only the slow, deliberate rise and fall of his chest signaled that he was still alive, and still listening. Inhale. Antonio drew a careful breath and continued, mindful not to raise his voice. The cult's latest gold-grade mission, it's spreading. Nearly all our Grandmaster tier operatives have entered the time-stilled world chasing it. Antonio said with hesitation, as he adjusted his robes. The promise of a mega reward, 6.5 billion megapixels, it's made even the most disciplined among them reckless. Dupravel's fingers twitched once. Antonio pressed on. But because of this diversion, our white and green grade missions have been suffering. Our completion rate is down nearly 50% this past week. Civilian clients are growing frustrated. Planetary contracts are lapsing. The forums are flooded with complaints. He paused, letting the weight of the next words settle carefully. The galaxy is starting to call us a house in chaos, Guildmaster. I understand how important Darnell is, truly, I do, but there must be a better way. Sending wave after wave into that cursed realm which is unlikely to yield any positive result, it's turning into a wild goose chase and could damage the foundations of our guild in the medium to long term. For a moment, the silence returned. Unbroken. Endless. Then, Dupravel exhaled. A long, guttural breath. His head lifted slowly, eyes half-lidded and clouded with shadows. The lines on his face were not just wrinkles. They were scars. Trophies from a world that had torn pieces of his mind and refused to return them. He stared at Antonio like he was looking through smoke. And then, in a voice cracked with rust, layered with something barely human, he growled. Do, not pull, mission. His words dragged across the room like claws on metal. Darnell, my blood, my son not stay, in them evil bastard hands. Antonio clenched his jaw, unmoving. Even if guild burn, Dupravel muttered, his shoulders jerking with the strain of staying upright. Even if universe spit, we get him back. He slammed a hand down, not in rage, but as if anchoring himself to reality. No cancel. No pause. Send more. If need. He leaned forward, voice dropping to a whisper that still shook the walls. Reputation, is name. Darnell, is blood. And with that, his head sagged again, like the effort of speech had drained what little coherence remained. Antonio said nothing. He simply bowed his head, turned, and walked away. There was no use arguing with a man who had survived 4,000 days in the time-stilled world. Because the truth was, not all of him had returned. Thud. As the office door closed shut behind him, Antonio finally grit his teeth and stomped his foot in anger, as he couldn't believe that Dupravel, even in the pitiful state that he was currently in, refused to stop chasing after his son. Goodness gracious Darnell, that boy was a curse for this guild from the moment he was born. And he will for sure be the undoing that dooms us all. Antonio cursed as he walked down the hallway with his cloak swaying behind him like a dying banner, footsteps echoing in a house that no longer felt like it stood for anything but loss. He didn't look back, because deep down, he already knew. The Black Serpents wouldn't survive this crisis. Not with a madman at the helm. And a prisoner for a prince. Meanwhile on planet Tithia, Fourth Elder's private training courtyard. Just a few months ago, the Fourth Elder's private training courtyard was a serene place covered with beautiful trees and small bushes that kept one's mind calm while training. However, just a couple months after Aegon Ver started to train here, there was not but a single blade of grass left alive. He stood shirtless at the center of the arena, arms loose by his side, his breathing steady but deep, as though his body had calmed but his blood was still boiling beneath the skin. He had just unleashed one of his most powerful attacks, and the air around him was still hot from the residual heat, as faint embers still curled upward from the ground around him, dancing and dying before they could reach his ankles. My lord, my lord. A lone attendant approached slowly, each step reluctant, as if unsure whether delivering his message would be worth the risk of getting torn apart for it or not. He held a scroll tightly in both hands, his robes clinging to him from the sweat that had formed not from heat, but from fear. Lord Ver, the attendant said, trying his best to sound composed though his voice cracked just slightly, the Fourth Elder has issued new orders. Ver didn't look at him, not right away, as he turned his head lazily toward the far edge of the courtyard where one of the older training pillars had crumbled into two and still hadn't been cleaned up. The attendant took that as permission to continue. He has hired a mannerisms instructor to begin etiquette training with you, starting from tomorrow morning, first light, the man finished, bowing his head low and bracing for a blow that didn't come. For a few seconds, silence reigned. Then Ver's lips parted, curling into a faint smile, not the kind that brought ease, but the kind that made your heart thump for the wrong reasons. A mannerisms instructor, he repeated, slowly turning to face the attendant with that same half-lidded, unreadable stare. To teach me how to sit and smile and sip soup properly. The attendant opened his mouth but said nothing, and Ver took a step forward, then another, closing the distance as his voice dropped lower. Listen carefully, he said, tilting his head just slightly, his gaze sharp and his tone calm, almost pleasant. If that instructor sets foot in this courtyard, if he even dares breathe the same air I'm standing in. His hand twitched slightly, as if reaching for the blade that wasn't there. I will cut his legs off at the knees, teach him about posture, and mount his jawbone over the gate so that the next fool sent to polish me remembers who I am before he knocks. The scroll slipped from the attendant's hands, falling to the floor without a sound. He dropped to his knees right after it, face pale, forehead pressed against the blackened stone as he began to mutter apologies without structure. But just before Ver could take another step forward, another voice entered the courtyard, firm, tired, and utterly humorless. You will do no such thing, Ver, the Fourth Elder said, his shadow stretching across the courtyard as he walked in from the southern corridor, his robes trailing dust behind him with every slow step. You will do exactly as I ask you to, he continued, not pausing in his stride as he walked straight into Ver's space and stopped only when they were standing face to face. Ver didn't flinch. He didn't look away. What for? He asked, not defiantly, but genuinely confused. My mannerisms are fine as they are. I am a warrior, remember. Not a politician like you. He folded his arms, voice warming with disdain as his gaze turned colder. I'm not going to change who I am so that my demeanor pleases the appetite of old fools like yourself, or the general populace who still mourn over the death of their previous dragon Noah. The elder exhaled, not loudly, but with the weight of a man who had lost the energy to argue even before the conversation began. He simply lifted his hand and pressed it to his forehead, rubbing slow circles above his brow as though trying to keep the headache from splitting his skull. I've just received news that the righteous faction has launched a coordinated assault on Juxta, he muttered under his breath, shaking his head slowly as his fingers lingered on his temple. Barely a few hours ago, they sent dozens of ships that were destroyed by our mana shield, and I've already had to take several meetings today before I even finished my evening tea. He lowered his hand and fixed his gaze on Ver again. I am not in the mood for arguments, not today. There was a long pause, and for a moment, it almost seemed like the elder would walk away, but then his tone shifted and became far more serious. You are no longer the only candidate for the dragon's title, he said flatly, as Ver's head tilted to the side, not out of disbelief but curiosity. What? You heard me, the elder replied, his voice quieter now, as though testing how deep the statement would cut. You have competition. And not just any competition. A real one. Vare's jaw tightened, though the rest of his body remained still. Don't make me laugh, he said, scoffing. I have no competition. I'm Aegon Vare. I was born unrivaled. You do have competition, the elder insisted, unfazed. His name is Leo Skyshard. And with that, Vare's posture shifted ever so slightly, not out of fear, but recognition. Leo Skyshard. He repeated, voice softer now. The breakout star from this year's circuits. The golden boy from the righteous side. The elder nodded once. Apparently, he's being raised by the 12th elder. They say he's always been an asset of the cult, and I am hearing his name being whispered in the same breath as knows by some elders. Vare narrowed his eyes slightly, not in anger, but in consideration, as the 4th elder stepped in even closer, his expression hard. You are no longer the only choice we have, and those elders that used to tolerate your arrogance because they had no alternatives, won't be so forgiving now. He turned away and began walking. We need to clean up your act, Vare. Make you presentable, at least on the surface. The last dragon, Noah, carried himself with poise and restraint, even when he was burning cities to the ground. He stopped at the edge of the platform. The elders and the people want someone who reminds them of him. So you will take those classes. No questions. No refusals. Vare said nothing at first. The wind moved through the courtyard like a whisper, lifting the edges of his trousers, carrying with it the scent of ash and heat. Finally, after a long pause, he ran a hand through his damp hair and let out a sharp exhale. Fine. He said the word like it tasted bitter. I'll let the instructor come. Let him try to teach me how to act like a puppet in a silk robe. He picked up the blade he had discarded earlier, spinning it once between his fingers. But do send a message to the elders who doubt me. His voice was calm now. Cold. I don't care how many tournaments Leo Skyshard has won. If you place him in a deathmatch against me, he won't survive 5 moves. Time-stilled world, perimeter of Castle Bravo, Leo's POV. Leo had never experienced the pressure that the soul of a god exerted on its surroundings, at least not until he began to approach the blackened walls of Castle Bravo, and felt, for the first time, the world itself beginning to reject his presence. It started gradually, like a shifting weight pressing against his skin, but the deeper he moved into the tainted zone surrounding the castle, the more the air thickened, growing heavier with every breath, as though each lungful he inhaled was being filtered through liquid stone before reaching his bloodstream. It's truly suffocating, Leo thought, as he slowed his pace, his eyes narrowing in quiet caution. Because the closer he drew to Castle Bravo, the more he realized that breathing was no longer a reflex, but rather a burden that needed conscious effort from his mind to be sustained. It appeared as though, even in death, even sealed in slumber, the soul of Zarnik cast a pressure so deep and absolute that it made his knees tremble from sheer biological revolt. As once again, he was reminded of just how tiny and insignificant he was compared to the strongest beings in this universe, when he felt his body drenched in sweat from head to toe, just from the effort of walking under the castle's suppressive aura. At around the 1-kilometer mark, something shifted. The wind, which had been a constant companion this high into the mountain range, suddenly vanished, cut off as though the world beyond that point had no place for motion. In its place came a silence that didn't feel natural, one that didn't settle, but hovered, pressing in against his ears, against his thoughts, against his sense of balance, as at that point, he suddenly stopped walking. He stopped, not because he saw anything move, nor because he sensed a trap, but because every fiber of his being, the very instincts that had carried him through blood, poison, betrayal, and fights all his life, were all telling him the same thing now. Cross that wall to enter Castle Bravo, and you die. Castle Bravo wasn't a ruin. It was a warning carved into stone, and the fact that it still stood untouched, despite being surrounded by a corrupted landscape that had devoured everything else in sight, only proved the point further. The wall that encircled the castle rose at least 60 feet high, built from a dark, vein-laced mineral that pulsed faintly under the world's colorless gray sky. At its center stood a massive gate, tall enough to let a behemoth pass through without ducking, yet sealed shut with two massive chains, and a warning sign that translated to "Danger. Do not open." Leo stood about 30 meters from the entrance, covered in sweat from head to toe, one hand resting near the hilt of his dagger out of habit, as he saw that danger sign and immediately decided to not make any rash decisions. "No," he muttered under his breath, letting the word drift between his teeth like a breath of caution, as instead of stepping forward, he stepped back, then back again, as he repeated the process until he pulled back about 100 meters from the entrance. There was no reason for him to charge into the castle just yet. As after some rough calculations, and based on his brief conversation with the captain, he knew that the next emergency evacuation flight wasn't going to come for about another 42 days. Which meant that he had a lot of time to carefully plan and execute his robbery, without needing to rush headfirst into anything. Rodova Military Academy, Stealth Assassination and Planning Class, Rule for Survival Number 1. Never enter a dangerous mission area without proper scouting and information. Leo muttered to himself, as he remembered the teachings of his Rodova professors, and began to look around for a vantage point from where he could scout the insides of Castle Bravo without risking an entry. It wasn't easy. However, after walking across the perimeter of the dead zone, surrounding the castle where no tree grew, he found one particularly tall, aged blackwood tree with branches wide and thick enough to support his weight. He then climbed the tree with minimal effort, choosing a perch about 70 feet off the ground, from where he could see beyond the castle wall and into most of the courtyard within. Once there, he began creating a makeshift platform, turning the perch into his scouting camp for the next few hours. He did so by securing a few ropes around the branches, to make a platform out of ropes, and then laid flat on it before pulling out binoculars out of his storage ring, as he began to scan every inch of the abandoned castle in front. What he saw inside was pretty much what he expected out of an abandoned castle. No movement, no guards, just a quiet courtyard filled with broken tiles, fractured archways, and faded banners that looked from a time long gone. It looked empty and harmless, but Leo trusted his instincts more than his eyes, and since his instincts told him that there was more danger than what met the eye, he waited patiently and continued to observe the castle without moving. Castle Bravo wasn't just a single structure. It was an entire complex, divided into distinct sectors, with the central fortress dominating the heart of the space. That building, taller than the rest, perhaps 5 stories high, was constructed from a darker mineral than the outer walls, almost obsidian-like, with countless runes etched across its surface in a script that pulsed faintly with tainted mana. That has to be where Zarnok's soul is sealed, Leo thought, shifting slightly as the pressure of the building alone made it difficult to hold the binoculars steady whenever he tried to focus on its inscriptions. It was like his mind rejected the idea of directly looking at it, as the moment his gaze lingered on that building for too long, his temples began to ache and his thoughts started to fray, as though an invisible force was quietly scraping against the edges of his awareness. So instead, he looked away, lowering his view to the auxiliary structures that flanked the courtyard. Of which, there were 5. The largest sat off to the eastern quadrant, its wide archways and crumbled towers suggesting it might have once served as the barracks or a training hall. Time hadn't been kind to that building, as half the roof had collapsed inward, and thick vines of corrupted mana veins coiled through its walls like veins through old flesh. Nothing moved within, but Leo could tell it wasn't safe. As he could feel a powerful aura resting within. To the north lay 2 narrow buildings, symmetrical and tall, almost like watchtowers, though no light or signal fire burned at their peaks. They looked inert, dead husks waiting for a command that hadn't come in 3,000 years. But it was the smallest building, tucked in the far west behind a row of skeletal trees, that caught Leo's attention most. A squat, square structure. No towers, no battlements, just thick, runic plating and a stone platform extending outwards like a ramp. That has to be it, that's the teleportation gate, Leo thought, as he had seen that structure before in diagrams. 4 pillar slots for mana conduits. A central dial, currently half buried in dust. And a collapsed crystalline arc jutting sideways like a shattered rib. He zoomed in further, trying to make out the markings on the stone base. Half the glyphs were unreadable from this distance, but the orientation was unmistakable. This was a teleportation portal. Sigh. Leo leaned back slightly, pulling the binoculars away as he exhaled. 42 days. That was the window. 42 days to fix that gate, plan a robbery, and time it to perfection, before the next rescue plane made its scheduled visit. Time-stilled world, tree perch overlooking Castle Bravo, Leo's POV. Over the next 2 days, Leo observed two bizarre phenomena occur within the castle walls, as he constantly monitored the ancient castle from his makeshift perch for any unusual activities. On the first day, about a few hours after he began observing the castle, he saw movement within it for the first time. It had to be dawn, based on how the sky had started to brighten up just slightly, when a specter emerged from the heart of the central fortress, garbed in pristine white robes. The hem of the specter's dress trailed against the floor without resistance, as though gravity itself dared not pull at the being's attire, as it moved across the castle slowly, but not aimlessly. In one hand, it held a long, silver incense stick, unlit, yet somehow leaving behind a trail of translucent blue smoke that curled through the courtyard like steam rising from hot coals. Its presence was not overly hostile, but it did not feel harmless either. As the specter made a single circuit of the courtyard, its translucent feet floating inches above the fractured tiles, Leo noticed how the corrupted mana surrounding the walls recoiled slightly wherever it passed, as though afraid to taint the being's path. Then, exactly 15 minutes after its appearance, the specter returned to the fortress and vanished behind its sealed doors, leaving the courtyard once again untouched by life or motion. Leo didn't blink or speak, he simply stared at the smoke trail, which lingered for nearly an hour after the specter's departure, before being slowly absorbed into the castle walls. 12 hours later, precisely at what Leo assumed was sunset in this time-stilled world, the specter reappeared with the same unlit incense stick in hand, as it performed the same tranquil orbit of the courtyard, like clockwork. "It's a priest," Leo muttered under his breath, piecing together the ritualistic pattern, or a relic performing a priest's duty, still walking the castle's grounds and praying to a dead god. The fact that it moved without hesitation or variation suggested programming, or madness. But the sheer aura it emitted said otherwise. Because even from afar, Leo could feel the pressure shift every time the being passed near the part of the wall he was closest to. As although it did not shift to look at him, Leo still felt his breath being stifled, when he saw the priest pass by. The priest is at least a monarch-tier being. The pressure it exudes is too strong to be just a transcendent-grade specter. Leo concluded internally, as he realized just how dangerous it was to enter the central building, where the priest allegedly lived for the remaining 24 hours. Although the first day was shocking, it was the second one when the castle revealed something far more disturbing. Something that made Leo's heart lurch and his instincts scream louder than before. It began when a group of 4 beasts emerged from the western edge of the corrupted forest. From his perch, Leo recognized them as Grandmaster tier ash wolves, their silver-black pelts rippling with unstable mana, as they looked like feral hounds chasing an instinct rather than a prey. They moved cautiously, sniffing the boundary around the castle wall, before slowly circling it until they found a small hole about 2 feet wide and 4 feet tall, which they used to enter. "Here we go," Leo thought, as he nervously watched for any signs of alarm or any exaggerated reaction from within the castle walls. However, nothing of the sort happened. The priest with the incense stick did not appear, nor did the threat he could sense residing inside the barracks, as although the wolves sniffed around the stone tiles of the courtyard and walked with reckless abandon, they were not harmed. Then, after 10 minutes of sniffing and pacing across the cracked courtyard with the kind of arrogant abandon that only beasts possess, the wolves growled low and departed the same way they came, leaving Leo uncertain about whether his fear over the castle's hidden danger was exaggerated or real. But then, something else happened that made his heart jump out of his chest. As roughly an hour later, another shape approached from the northern slope, this one an armored specter, that seemed to charge towards the castle with vengeance in its eyes. The armored specter radiated the aura of a transcendent tier combatant, and it seemed to be headed straight towards the central building, for it made a beeline towards it after entering the castle's borders. Here we go, Leo thought again, his grip unconsciously tightening around his dagger, as he expected this to be the real test of the dangers lurking inside the castle. And it proved to be exactly that. As the moment it made its way across the common courtyard and towards the central building, the spirit inside the barracks stirred. A ghost in silver armor, tall and regal, wielding a peculiar blade that looked almost like a broken tuning fork, appeared before the transcendent tier challenger, and then, in a single instant, neutralized the threat. Boom! The air twisted. The stone cracked. The very light inside the courtyard warped, as though pulled into a black hole centered around that silver knight. And just like that, the transcendent tier specter that had come to attack the castle was defeated and erased from existence forever. The fuck was that attack? Leo whispered in shock, his breath being caught in his throat, as every single thing inside the courtyard, including an unlucky tainted crow perched on the wall, were sliced in half. The attack wasn't just a simple strike. It was a domain, a killing field wrapped in precision, cast by a being that didn't even seem fully awake. Leo's mouth went dry, as the implications began to weigh heavier than the binoculars in his hand. This isn't just a castle, it's a fortress with automated monarch-level security, he whispered, as he leaned his back against the tree trunk, pulling the binoculars away slowly, his mind reeling from shock. Just how the fuck am I supposed to breach that place, let alone steal from it? He mused, as let alone the dangers that lurked inside the central building. Simply the ones that were visible outside made this seem like an impossible mission to even attempt. Time-stilled world, outside Castle Bravo walls, Leo's POV. Over the next 24 hours, Leo seriously contemplated whether attempting this mission was even worth risking his life over or not. For although he wasn't the type of man to cower in the face of danger, this mission was still something else. There came a point, he believed, where every warrior had to ask themselves whether the reward truly justified the risk, and whether there was any chance of success at all. Or whether they were being delusional and chasing rainbows that did not exist. As for the first time in a very long while, Leo did not feel confident in the answer. He'd watched, waited, and noted everything down in agonizing detail from his perch, and while there were moments where the castle seemed silent and passive, it was impossible for him to forget how one transcendent tier specter that was much stronger than him was completely erased from existence with a single attack from the silver armored guard. Being a firm believer in the philosophy that no mission was worth dying for, Leo felt like this might be the one mission that was beyond his current scope of abilities. But then, a sliver of possibility presented itself. During his extended watch, Leo noticed something again and again, about how Grandmaster tier beasts and specters wandering through the walls were left unharmed by the silver armored guard. As even when the beasts went sniffing near the central building, walking up to its doors, or even when they howled or attacked each other in the courtyard, the silver armored ghost inside the barracks never so much as stirred. Not once. As that gave him hope. So that's it, Leo narrowed his eyes. The guard only moves against perceived threats. And anything below a certain threshold isn't one. He concluded, as this turned out to be one of those situations where being too weak turned out to be an advantage. Perhaps because he was weaker than a cockroach in front of the guard, it seemed like the guard would not be too keen to bother with him. And if this really turned out to be the case, then perhaps, just perhaps, he still had a shot at completing this mission. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give him a slimmer of hope. So, on the fourth day, just after the priest had gone back inside the central building after his morning round, Leo made his decision to enter Castle Bravo. Not to rob it, not yet, but to examine the only thing that could determine whether this entire mission was suicide or salvageable, the teleportation gate. Because without it being functional, there was no escape plan. And without a functional escape plan, there was no mission. Slipping down from the tree branch with silent grace, Leo made his way to the hole in the wall that the wolves had previously used. His every movement was calculated, his breaths measured and shallow, his senses pulled so taut that even the imperceptible crunch of corrupted leaves beneath his boots sounded deafening. As he stepped past the boundary, into the courtyard of Castle Bravo, he felt it immediately. The pressure changed, not just in how suffocating it felt, but in nature, as though unseen eyes were now watching his every move. The corrupted mana was denser here, heavier, slower, like it had been soaked in spiritual decay and left to rot for millennia. Each step was a test of willpower. Yet today might just be my last day alive, Leo muttered inwardly, as he crouched low, one hand never leaving the hilt of his dagger while the other mentally traced the teleportation points of Stormflash traversed to the nearest wall. He etched it 3 times in his mind. And again. If anything even twitched, he would flash out of this place and not look back. His nerves screamed, his heart pounded so loudly he worried it would echo through the courtyard, but somehow, nothing responded. No priest, no guard, no flicker of awareness from the barracks or the central tower. Step by agonizing step, Leo made his way across the cracked courtyard, ducking behind rubble, slipping between collapsed archways, staying low and close to walls until finally, the ancient teleportation gate came into view. It stood like a forgotten relic, half buried in stone and soot, overgrown with sickly moss that pulsed faintly with mana, its circular frame cracked in several places but otherwise intact. He crouched beside it, running his fingers along the etched symbols lining the outer rim, brushing off debris with careful, almost reverent motions. Let's see what we're working with. The runes were ancient and filled with olden-time glyphs, some of which had fused into the stone itself due to mana corrosion. But the gate's core matrix, the one that dictated coordinates and transit structure, was still recognizable. Leo pulled out his notebook and scribbled quickly. He traced the central glyph cluster. Cross-referenced it against the teleportation theories he'd learned at the conclave. And after several long minutes, he exhaled sharply. It's not broken, he whispered. Just dormant, with a new power core in me inputting the correct geological coordinates, this rusty thing can probably still take me out. The mana intake crystal embedded near the base had long since cracked and dried up, no doubt the result of millennia of neglect, but the leyline veins still ran beneath the courtyard. They were faint, but present. If he could replace the intake crystal. If he could smoothen out the old mana veins and activate the old circuitry, fixing the old mana conductor. And if he wasn't killed before doing it all, then maybe, just maybe, I can activate it from inside the courtyard. Set the destination and use it to get back out at the perfect moment. He thought, as he scanned the courtyard again for signs of trouble. His heart still beat loudly in his chest, as he did not feel at ease within the castle walls at all. He felt like one wrong breath might be all it took for the castle to swallow him whole. However, once again, no threat approached. There might be some hope. I need to think about this more carefully, Leo concluded, as he escaped the castle in a blur and returned to his vantage point atop the tree to gather his thoughts. The plan was undoubtedly extremely dangerous, and needed him to regularly leave his vantage point and repair the teleportation array over the coming days. However, it was possible. He could theoretically fix it in time before the next plane came, and use it to escape if everything else aligned as well. What do I do? Do I go for this mission? Or do I leave with my life intact now? Leo whispered, dragging a hand through his wet hair, as he felt a bead of sweat roll down his spine. He knew that the dangers of attempting this mission were too high. However, with the potential rewards being linked to him finally being able to reunite with his family, the thought of turning back after coming so far left a bitter taste in his mouth. Fuck, he cursed, clenching his jaw, as he looked at the castle and then towards the sky, as faces of his family members appeared between the gray clouds. His body trembled, not just from fear, but from longing. From the ache of being lost too long, as against his better judgment, he leaned towards making an emotional call. I didn't come this far to walk away, he muttered, the whisper barely louder than a rustle. I made a name off completing the impossible as the boss, now let's see if I was ever worthy of it. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.